This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in the fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. A special broadcast today for our entire 3 hours and through the morning. The Earthshot Prize is the item of note here at these UN meetings. We are at the Plaza Hotel. Paul Sweeney insisted he could not come because the coffee's too good here. Sitting in for Paul Sweeney, David Gura. It's a combination today of innovation, entrepreneurship, what we're doing in the world about climate change, and also we got to stay on economics, finance, and investment.
Yeah, a bevy of news, which we'll get to, of course, about markets, about China in particular. But as you say, this event bringing together a lot of philanthropists, government officials from around the world, taking advantage of the fact that here we are at the 79th meeting of the UN General Assembly, and a lot of world leaders and officials are in town. We'll be drawing from a lot of those who will be attending this event here at the Plaza Hotel today, Tom.
We'll tell you about this, and of course, one of the lead items we have here is perhaps a speech by President Biden today here at the Plaza Hotel. We'll have much more on that through the morning. I really want to point out that we will stay focused on the markets, the bombshell news out of China that we saw overnight, maybe 3, 4, 5 hours ago. Amy Wu Silverman will be with us in a moment on the impact on rising equity markets in the United States. Steve Carroll of Bloomberg Radio London with us later on the effects upon Europe.
The coffee's so good that he came from London to be with us here at the Plaza this morning. Yes, all the ramifications of those Chinese decisions, but also, of course, what's going to be the substance of the speeches here today. Yes, President Biden coming here to the Plaza Hotel, but also giving his last address to the UN General Assembly a little later this morning, a speech that's likely to center on the Middle East, on Ukraine and Russia as well. So we'll be listening to that as it unfolds.
I have a bar bill due from 1972 from the sink in Boulder, Colorado. Someone's come to collect it today.
Yes, Governor Jared Polis of Colorado is going to join us as Colorado is in focus on this campaign.
Hugely in focus,
yes.
Like not just one district.
Yeah, so we'll talk with him about the latest goings-on on the Hill in Boulder and what's going on the Hill in Washington as well.
We welcome all of you in your morning commute across the nation. Of course, Sirius XM, we welcome you on the quarter, 99.1 FM in Washington. Our flagship here in New York City, Bloomberg 1130. Good morning in Boston, 92.9 FM. And now from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, we've got green on the screen, and this is as China unveiled more measures to boost its economy. So right now we'll get to NASDAQ futures. Little change, but up about 10 points. We have Dow futures, little change, up 19 points, and S&P futures, they are little change right now. Key benchmarks in China, Hong Kong jumped about 4%. U.S. listed shares of Alibaba up more than 5%. JD.com up more than 7%. Let's take a look at commodities right now. We'll start with spot gold higher, $2,632 an ounce. We have Brent crude higher, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $72 a barrel. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield 3.59%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.78%, and that's up 3 basis points. Few companies making news. Boeing, they sweetened the pay package to its striking workers, offering a 30% bump. Now the terms are final, only valid until the end of Friday, and union leaders, well, they say that's not enough time. Meanwhile, Boeing and Airbus supplier Spirit AeroSystems reviewing 14 years of internal records, discovered errors with paperwork for aircraft parts manufactured, and finally shares of Visa lower, down 2%. Sources say the DOJ, they plan to sue it for allegedly monopolizing the U.S. debit card market. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. We're going to, of course, be looking at the lift in the markets worldwide off the Chinese, if you will. They liquefied their monetary system. A lot of talk from Bloomberg Economics about a fiscal support as well. But we have a lift to the markets worldwide. My number one item is the renminbi at 7.03. A 6.99 would be huge, David. Amy Wu Silverman joins now from the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC Capital Markets. Amy, what is the measurement of exuberance you see in this bull market when you look at the cross moments, when you look at skew and the other things of the derivatives world? How exuberant is this bull market?
It's So, Tom, that was the first question I asked myself after we got that big rate cut last week. And unfortunately, I have to tell you that there's not much from the derivatives market. There's not much from skew. Everything we saw the first 6 months of this year, amazing call exuberance, still not there. And unfortunately, we continue to see stickiness on that downside skew instead. So the options market not really playing along, I guess, to what we're feeling in the equity markets.
Amy, let me ask you about what we learned from China this morning and how that's going to trickle out and wave through equities markets around the world. So we see the PBOC taking these extreme steps here, trying to bolster and fortify the economy there in China. What will that mean for investors, yes, in Europe, but in the U.S. as well as the day gets started here in New York?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at the China news today, and I just can't tell you how many conversations I've had with investors who we cover who have just been burned by the China trade. I don't know if you remember at the end of every single year, it's always, this is the year of the China rebound. And unfortunately, we haven't got that sustainably. Does this kind of move the needle? Sure. But I think for investors, it's going to be a little bit of, we'll wait and see. In the options market, we'll take a look at FXI, which is that proxy. There's been a lot of call exuberance there as an upside tail play. However, it hasn't been sustainable. And it's just a question of, yes, we got the stimulus, but will it work? And I think that will kind of take time to tell.
Let's just stick with central banks here a little bit. And yesterday was such a busy day for speeches from Federal Reserve officials, Raphael Bostic, Austin Goolsbee, all speaking. I wonder what caught your ear as they talked about that 50 basis point cut from last week and sort of how this changes maybe the size of that aperture when you look at so much of how the Fed has consumed our attention and interest leading up to that meeting. So what's changed as a result of that rate cut and what stood out to you from those speeches?
Yeah, when I hear the speeches and you hear the kind of quote, many, many more rate cuts to come, obviously that something is going to spur the market. The tension has always been why we are getting so many of these cuts and what that means for growth. And I think when you look at the underlying concern from derivatives, that that's what it speaks to, because what the derivatives market is reflecting back to you in equities is essentially those tension lines, and it's really all about growth. That's why I think when you map out the different sectors and ETFs, right, you see it more in defensives and cyclicals. You see it less in kind of the what you would consider the growthy names like Mag 7. And so we continue to still see tension there, meaning under the surface, folks are worried about the why of why these cuts are happening and not necessarily just the fact that we may or may not get them.
Right. But Amy, how do you mathematically discount the substantial revenue growth of the Mag 7? We saw the Microsoft buyback program, a 10% dividend lift, but there's many more items like that to come, let's suggest. If you discount, given the environment, Goolsbee talking about more rate cuts, if you discount that, aren't those stocks more valuable into the future?
Sure. I'll say two things about that I think are really interesting, Tom. The first is, when you ask the question of how much of that is priced in, when you look at CFTC positioning, when you look at options positioning, they can't get much more full, meaning, to some degree, people have bought into that story. The second is it specifically relates to buybacks. I've always thought is very interesting, because if you think about what a buyback is, especially on the Mag 7, it's essentially similar to selling a put, right? That's basically the Treasury is putting a put under the stock because it's saying, I'm going to backstop the stock at this certain price. What that does is it artificially dampens that downside. It makes it seem artificially like there isn't that much concern when under the surface there actually is. That's what happens when you get those big buyback announcements on the option surface.
What's fascinating here, David, is about the mix of free cash flow growth and revenue growth. And there's this whole bet on the street that we're going to walk away from the Mag 7. I'm waiting to see that. I mean, it's happening, but you wonder where we're going to be in 12 months, given the newer, lower rate regime.
Amy, pick up on that. I mean, what's going to be the catalyst for that to happen? And Tom is right. He's waiting. I'm waiting. We've been waiting a long time to see sort of movement beyond those 6, 7 stocks. What's your sense of what's going to bring that about when it happens?
Look, to some degree, you could argue it has been happening when you look at equal weight S&P compared to just market weight S&P. You have seen that degree of outperformance. I would say the way people are playing it is obviously through kind of the small mid-cap proxy, using IWM as that proxy, right? And when you look at the sentiment there, that upside tail, so meaning the right tail, the idea that that's really going to trigger further upside, further exuberance, as Tom would call it, people are sitting on that as a right tail hedge. And that really goes back to the playbook at the beginning of the year when people felt FOMO and MOMO for Mag 7. You're seeing that playbook essentially being translated into this small mid cap space, but no one's like jumped in the pool yet. Everyone's dipped their toe in the water because they're getting ready for if something like that were to happen.
That's a nice way to put it. Amy Wu Silverman, we'll see you at SPX 6000. Amy Wu Silverman is with RBC Capital Markets. We're at the Plaza Hotel. There's not been an Eloise sighting yet.
No, although Tom has said charge it please repeatedly.
I think we'll see Eloise in 40 minutes before the school bus as well. At our world headquarters with our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, Lisa. Lebanese health authorities have raised the death toll from 2 days of Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah militants in Lebanon to almost 560. Palestinian officials in Gaza, meanwhile, said new Israeli strikes today killed at least 7 people in the southern city of Khan Yunis. Israel's military says it will do whatever is necessary to push Hezbollah away from Lebanon's border with Israel. President Biden has a busy day today as he addresses the UN General Assembly in the morning. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says in the afternoon the president will focus on the global problem of illicit drugs.
The president will host a summit of the Global Coalition to address synthetic drug threats. We established this coalition ourselves just last year to drive international action in order to disrupt the global supply chain of illicit fentanyl and other synthetic drugs.
The president is expected to speak at the UN around 10 a.m. Wall Street time, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump traded barbs on the campaign trail. The Harris campaign is deploying billboards mocking Trump's refusal to accept another debate. In Pennsylvania last night, Trump doubled down, saying migrants are taking over various towns across the country, like Springfield, Ohio, where he falsely claimed Haitian immigrants are eating people's pets.
And I'll say it now, you have to get them the hell out. You have to get them out. I'm sorry.
The crowd chanted, "Send them back." Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. David Gura with us here, who attended and survived the presidential debate of a number of days ago. We're really coming up on Walz, Vance, Walz. What should we look for at Lafayette College, right?
Yes, I think that it'll be a more closely watched vice presidential debate than we've seen in the past. I think that people, of course, haven't seen these two men together, eager to see that dynamic, but also we haven't seen Governor Walz on that stage in this kind of format before. And as you say, the last two debates have been strange in their own ways, but here I think an opportunity for the electorate to get more familiar with both of these candidates. And I think a lot of folks will be watching.
It's going to be fascinating. I mean, to see it again. Anne-Marie Horton, I believe, working our coverage down there, and we'll just have to see how that turns out. I don't buy yet that it's as important as you say it is, but I could be wrong. We'll have to see. On October 1, we are here at the Plaza in New York City, the Earthshot Awards. Please stay with us from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures, and this is after stocks closed at another record high. Investors now awaiting data on the Fed's preferred price metric and U.S. personal spending later this week. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 6 points. Dow futures down about 6 points as well. S&P futures down about a point. We have the 2-year yield at 3.59%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.78%, and that's up 3 basis points. Stocks in China, Hong Kong surged more than 4% after that string of stimulus measures from China aimed at shoring up economic growth. The stock 600 in Europe, that 600 index, up about 0.6%. That's led by sectors with heavy exposure to China, miners, luxury good makers, also automakers, and a few companies making news. Chevron, sources say its $53 billion purchase of Hess, well, that's expected to get the nod by the FTC as soon as this week. We have Chevron up nearly 1%, Hess up more than 2%. And Maersk getting ready for potential labor disruptions. It's implementing a local port disruption surcharge. It's for all cargo that's moving to and from the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast terminals. That takes effect October 21st. And shares of Starbucks lower, down more than 1%. Got a downgrade from Jefferies to underperform from Hold, set a new street low target. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. David Gura and Tom Keir, Paul Sweeney on sabbatical today, but we're at the Plaza Hotel, and we should explain why before we bring in really the perfect guest to start here at the Earthshot Prize. 3 years ago, David Attenborough and Prince William say, can we actually do something serious to move innovation forward? That was the genesis of this whole project.
That's the genesis, and today we'll see the finalists for this award that's given out annually. The announcement of the award winners will come a little later in the year, but they'll speak here along with past winners and with a panoply of government officials and philanthropists who are gathered here at the Plaza for this event today.
And I will say that it just goes back to the Paris meetings, which I was kind enough to attend. This goes back to actually real application of what we can do about the innovation around climate change, our environment. Joining us right now, she's with Airbus Ventures. She's not with Airbus, although she likes a beluga, but she's with Airbus Ventures. Nicole Conner joins us here on investment in all of this. Is there too much money chasing too few ideas, or the other way around?
I'd say it's the other way around. There's so many opportunities right now, and I think this is a really special time for venture capital and for these startups who are working on taking these important emerging technologies out of the lab and into the real world. At our fund, we're investing in everything from autonomy to electrification, the low carbon economy, new space, advanced materials, quantum computing, networking, and sensing. And as we've seen at Climate Week, there's no end to the number of startups who are trying to solve these important challenges.
You have a wonderful transatlantic view at Airbus Ventures. What I see when I'm in London or Paris is a huge success or belief in the future of climate versus a hugely fractious United States debate on climate. Describe that debate and how it affects investment.
What we see is that we're investing in seed to Series B companies who are working on bricks of technology that are hoping to solve this challenge. We are uniquely positioned as one of the few global VC funds. We're investing all over the world. And what we see is an optimism on seeing how these technologies can help shape the future of tomorrow. Some of these technologies that will be changing products, in decades' time. So we have a very optimistic view on the current environment.
Help me with the term deep technology. So you invest in deep technology entrepreneurship. Yeah. What does it mean, and sort of how does that set you apart from other VC shops?
We're investing in the hardest engineering problems to solve. And the deep tech investment practice is extremely important in unlocking these opportunities down the chain. So when you think about one of our portfolio companies who's sitting in the Brooklyn Navy Yard called QNect. They're working on quantum networking hardware. This is a product suite that will sit on existing telecom infrastructure to allow for quantum communications. why that matters is that's ultra secure communication. So the national security sector is very interested in seeing even if you can use their product suite to see if someone is tapping the line. And ultra secure communication matters for so many industries, finance, defense, national security, of course. So that's where we're focused on. How can we work on using these bricks of technology to unlock other problems?
Nicole, we'll get Tom over to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Maybe we'll get you to Brooklyn at some point.
There's lobsters over
There's
there,
bagels,
right?
lobsters. You have a great meal while we're there.
It's an incredible community over there.
Tell me about your background. I mean, you are somebody's a lawyer. You're based in D.C. I remember talking with Steve Case a while back about sort of broadening the reach of VC beyond Boston, beyond the Bay Area. What added value perspective does that give you being based in Washington versus those other places?
Well, certainly in the areas that we're investing, these are all on the critical and emerging technologies list for the U.S. So many of our portfolio companies, they are in and out of D.C., meeting with their customers, the agencies, the aerospace primes in Northern Virginia, have meetings on the Hill. I think there is a strong appetite to better understand how these technologies can be plugged into other areas and challenges that we have. I would say with my background, what we like to say within our fund is that we have a Swiss Army knife of a team. You know, founders have no end to the challenges that they need to navigate. And so yes, I bring my financial and operational background. We have aerospace engineers, mechanical engineers, physicists, all of whom are working with our founders to get their technologies out into the market.
You are living the skepticism of America over climate change. In this election, David's expert on the election, I'm not, but you go state to state, it's almost an unmentionable by the two candidates. How does America become more like Europe in climate change, or do you suggest we stay distant from the enthusiasm?
I think it's important to focus on the technologies themselves, because in the debate, it's getting lost. Like, for example, we could look at hydrogen aircraft. These are exciting opportunities. This is what the market wants, is they want to have novel ways of flying that has less climate impact. And so we like to stay out of the noise and in terms of any debate on this, because we think the technologies will show themselves.
What do folks need to know just about the environment for venture capital at this point? We've been through a couple of years when the environment wasn't as great as it had been. Where are we in the arc of sort of its energy or success, or how does it feel at this moment being in VC?
Feeling optimistic, actually. I think that there's a lot. It's important right now, and we as a fund want to really bring the expertise into bringing these technologies out. And so I think it's important that right now we're seeing VC funds who have special expertise really focused on the founders. And I think the interest rate helps. Yes. It certainly helps, and so we're feeling good, and I think hopefully getting through the election process itself will.
I've got my question of the day. It's a shock worldwide that Microsoft is going to team up for electrical generation through 3 Mile Island with Constellation Energy. How did you react when you saw that? I mean, talk about a jump condition for energy, or energy generation, I should say. Yeah.
I think it's just reflective of the fact that companies are eager for anyone to find solutions for the energy crisis that they have. I mean, if you think about AI, there's a huge amount of energy consumption in order to run some of these models. And so it's unsurprising that they're looking for any particular technology that can help solve their problem.
Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Nicole Conner
Enjoy the conference
with us with Airbus Ventures today, getting us started here at the Earthshot Prize Awards. And again, it's 15 people selected today to weed down to 5 winners in Cape Town.
Will you be a winner going to Cape Town?
I think
we'll
we
see.
should.
I
think
know,
we should. I think the entire team should go to Cape Town and bring Gura with us.
It'll be a major announcement that comes to pass.
We'll get that done. On the markets, so we're going to keep you abreast of the markets today. What am I watching? I've got to watch a stronger renminbi. We're not through 7.00 on yuan, but certainly a lift to the markets. Can I talk about 5,800 SPX? We're not there yet, but all of a sudden it's within range.
Andy Wu-Silverman talking about the magnitude of those announcements from China earlier this morning, how they're rippling out across the world through Europe and the United States, and you see it there in futures as we approach the market open here in a couple hours' time.
Futures with a lift here, a higher yield space as well. We are here at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The Earthshot Prize is a point of discussion. We've got many good conversations coming up. Please stay with us on YouTube. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, little movement right now. This is after China's central bank had unleashed a blitz of policy support for the economy. Key benchmarks in China, Hong Kong, they jumped about 4%. So NASDAQ futures up about 11 points, but at 20,091. We have Dow futures up 18 points, 42,518. S&P futures up about a point at 5,778. We have the 2-year yield at 3.59%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that's up 3 basis points. We had some more Fed speak. Austin Goolsbee said with inflation approaching the central bank's target, the focus should turn to the labor market, and that means likely many more rate cuts over the next year. And then you had Neil Kashkari also pointed to weakness in the job market, saying that he backs lowering interest rates by another 0.5 percentage point by year end. We're not done yet. Today we'll hear from the Fed's Michelle Bowman. Few companies making news. Novo Nordisk, its CEO, will testify at a Senate hearing today. He's expected to blame the cost of Ozempic and Wegovy on middlemen. He says that drug prices have actually decreased. And finally, CrowdStrike's vice president expected to testify to Congress on July's global IT outage. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. From the Plaza Hotel of 1907, and the ceiling above us, David, is extraordinary. It looks like it could be original from 120 some years ago, but we welcome all of you here for the Earthshot prize. David Gura and Tom Keene, thank you on YouTube for joining us. And on your morning commutes, we'll keep you very much abreast of what's going on, particularly the important news out of China overnight, lifting markets worldwide. This is a joy. He is someone at Morgan Stanley who's done the tour of duty, and very rarely do you see such an extended commitment to one project. That project, well, maybe it's not as iconic as the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but within global Wall Street, MSCI is understood by all. Henry Fernandez joins us this morning with your baby, MSCI. What was it like the first years of MSCI, where you had to go into every meeting to explain, what are we doing there? Now you own emerging market and global index analysis.
So I created the company 30 years ago on top of the, what was then the Morgan Stanley Capital International indices. And that was the only product we had, right? Market cap indices. And it was a cost center, so we didn't have a lot of resources. And the world wanted a lot from us. Yeah. So we had to, educate a lot of people and expand and, eventually bought a lot of companies and spun out of Morgan Stanley, and it's a $40 billion market cap company today.
You were focused on the innovation here of the countability of data over to the climate challenges we have. How are you going to bring your data acumen over to a better measurement of our climate disaster?
So clearly, climate risk is an existential risk for all of us. But in the capital industry, you can decimate portfolios. There'll be winners and losers, and all of them are in your portfolio today. So the question is, how are you going to discern who those are, and how are you going to start transitioning to a low-carbon portfolio? So it's a lot of it a question of measurement. So what's the nature of your problem? Where is the carbon emissions? Where are the big climate risks? What do you do about it? Where do you start? Do you start in private assets, in public assets? And very importantly, at what pace do you go? If you go too fast, you're going to underperform. And if you
Is Europe gone too fast?
Huh?
Is Europe gone too fast?
No. I mean, nothing in the world is going too fast. For, the Paris Agreement put a date of 2050 because we needed to get 200 countries to agree. But it was so far out that, people think that this is a long-term problem. Of course, it is a long-term problem, but it's also a short to medium-term problem. We already see an enormous physical risk around the world.
I mean, you've got a risk in Brooklyn that your house could flood away, right?
Well, thankfully we're not on the bottom floor, but yes.
If the East River gets any bigger,
erode,
there goes the Gura
make
house.
its way up Park Slope. I remember talking to Anne Finucane on her last day at Bank of America about ESG, something about which she's so passionate and has been for so long. And we talked about the issue of standardization, that companies trying to keep up with this kind of data have so many ways in which they're filing or making filings known. Help me understand that, where we are in that process of winning and simplifying data when it comes to ESG and climate issues in particular. Is it still too much of a Wild West than it should be?
No, really, there is, first of all, ESG is investment risk and opportunity.
Yes.
It's turned politicized, into political philosophies, but, it's about understanding the capital markets and the risk associated with it with additional information, right, in terms of non-financial information, as you know well. Secondly, unfortunately, we call them ratings, and we have a metric system that is similar to credit ratings. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people think that there has to be convergence of the ratings, just like credit ratings have convergence, where credit ratings are unidimensional. Mm-hmm. It's about cash flows and the stability of the cash flows. So how far can you be between different people, right, in terms of the rating? ESG measures a huge number of various things. So it's almost like a sell-side opinion.
Yes.
So therefore, it's very hard to think that you're going to end up with, standardization of the ratings, because, my opinion at MSCI may be different than our competitors' opinion. They may think that governance is more important. We may think that climate is more important. The key is not on the ratings. The key is to make sure the quality of the data.
Henry Fernandez with us with MSCI here at the Earthshot Prize, the Plaza Hotel. David?
Let's talk about sort of one area in particular, the sort of voluntary carbon credit market. I know that MSCI has kind of looked at the integrity of that data, rated that data. How representative is that of the work that you're doing when it comes to climate in particular? And what did you find kind of looking at those data in particular?
So first of all, we believe strongly that voluntary carbon markets have to be part of the process of the risk in the portfolios of the world and the world itself. Every place else we go, markets serve a function of transferring value and transferring risk. And in climate, we're going to say they don't play any function. It's crazy to think that they won't. The issue is, how do we build integrity and understanding that what you buy is what you thought you were buying and all of that. So we have come up with ratings. We have 4,000 projects right now that we're rating. We just announced that last week. And we're going to bring more integrity, more data, and quality.
How do you rating something in Chengdu, China? Explain to me the data veracity we can bring to the distrust around what China's doing in carbon management, in coal management. Are you optimistic that we can get a handle on that?
Well, I was just in Chengdu, China, a couple of months ago to begin with, but importantly...
Did you go see the pandas?
Absolutely.
Good. Okay. That's a number one thing we've learned from Andy Fernandez here this morning.
Yeah.
And but it's not different that how we classify countries, how we classify ESG companies. How we look at carbon. So we collect an enormous amount of data from independent sources, and then we sort of package it into a classification system of the various sources. And then, we create the ratings.
For our American audience, coast to coast, thank you this morning for listening and tuning in on YouTube as well. There's a belief here that China's cheating. Does MSCI have the data amount or veracity to say that China is or is not cheating, or any other country for that matter?
Well, I mean, they could be cheating in many different aspects, obviously. But in our case, we have incredible sources of independent data. The global press, the local press, sometimes is obviously controlled. To find independent sources and verify those sources like a newspaper would, to understand what is the nature of the climate emissions of a company, what is the nature of ESG, what is the nature of, in the west of China and all of that. And it doesn't make us popular in China necessarily, but we have an independent view and an unbiased view, and that's how we rate everything, including in China, right? But it's not different than Indonesia, sometimes not different than Nigeria, not different than Mexico and the like.
A last question here, just given your perspective, having traveled to the bamboo forest in Chengdu and elsewhere, what don't we understand about emerging markets today, sort of coming out of the pandemic as we see the world reopening again? What are people misunderstanding or not understanding about sort of the health of?
First of all, emerging market is a catch-all.
Yes.
Right? So you have to then break it down into, commodity exporting markets, consumer markets, and markets that don't have a lot of competitive advantages, right? Secondly, is emerging markets are where the demographics, growth is in the world. They have a lot of problems, obviously. Emerging markets is where the climate problem will be the biggest,
acute, yeah.
Because they don't have a lot of resources. But they also present significant opportunities, in the world. So there is a little bit of too much of a gloss over, emerging markets that you need to go more in depth into each category and understand Brazil is different than Turkey, different than China. Right?
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you.
I'd like to continue this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'd love to see you over at Bloomberg. Henry Fernandez with us here with MSCI this morning. Markets, of course, mixed, red and green, but lifting all in all. Bond market yields are higher. With our news at our world headquarters in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. David, Lisa, Israel says it attacked more than 1,300 Hezbollah targets in the past 24 hours. Israel and Hezbollah are trading strikes again as the death toll from a massive Israeli bombardment climbs to nearly 560 people. Thousands of people fled from southern Lebanon with the two sides on the brink of all-out war. The conflict in the Middle East is expected to be a main topic for President Biden during his address to the UN General Assembly today. The speech is scheduled around 10 a.m. Wall Street time, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Embattled North Carolina Republican gubernatorial candidate Mark Robinson vowed to a room full of supporters that he will be staying in the race. It comes after a report from CNN released last week alleging the lieutenant governor was behind a number of racist posts on a pornography website's message board. Robinson says he is prepared to keep going.
We might have got knocked down a little bit right now. They might be hitting us pretty good right now, but guess what? We're not going anywhere. We're not quitting. We're not leaving. And we are going to win this race.
Robinson, speaking at a diner in Boone, also says he's thinking of legal action against CNN, but has not formulated an exact plan yet. Senators on Capitol Hill want to know why Ozempic is so expensive. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
Novo Nordisk CEO Lars Fruergaard Jorgensen is expected to use a familiar argument to defend the prices of Ozempic and Wegovy in the U.S. market. It's the middlemen. In his written testimony, reviewed by Bloomberg ahead of today's hearing, Jorgensen explains Novo retains only a fraction of its drugs' list prices, with the rest paid to companies that manage pharmacy benefits. The Danish company faces increasing pressure to make its medicines more affordable as demand skyrockets. Many patients pay out of pocket to use them for weight loss, which some insurers don't cover. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. Of course, we know last night the Detroit Tigers did not play. There is in Detroit urgent optimism over their future into the wild card race in the baseball as well. We'll get much more on Michael Barr on that tomorrow. David Gura, I want to talk about the urgent optimism in our political campaign in the themes of climate. I would say it's simply off the radar. Am I right?
Yeah, it's not something that's talked about a lot. I think we've covered that a little bit this morning, just how you make that palatable to the electorate, make it urgent to the electorate, make it an important issue to them. And we're getting some insights on how that could be the case. I think focusing on investment, focusing on ways that this could boost the economy is one effective route, potentially effective route to do that.
It is fundamentally a distrust of a big policy in America. I have a clear memory of a defeated energy policy vote. Do we have an energy policy in America?
You know, it was so integral to that big Inflation Reduction Act, the spending that this government is doing on climate-related programs on green energy. Again, I think if you look at what the Biden administration has done, what they haven't been effective at is selling that to the American people. The fact that this has boosted the economy in such a big way and boosted a lot of districts, and particularly red districts around the country.
The summation for those of you with us across this nation on Bloomberg Radio and, of course, on YouTube is simple. A lift to the market on a blended basis. Futures up 0.2%. S&P futures up 8 right now, with yields higher on monetary change in China, monetary stimulus. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures seeing a slight lift, and this is after China's central bank unleashed a blitz of policy support for the economy. NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, about 38 points at 20,118. Dow futures up 0.1%, 60 points at 42,561. And we have S&P futures up about 6 points at 5,783. The two-year yield at 3.61%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that's up about 4 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,624 an ounce. We have Brent crude higher at $75 a barrel. WTI crude at $72 a barrel. A few companies making news. TikTok, it says it's going to shut down its music streaming business at the end of November. Its parent company, ByteDance, it was trying to capitalize on the app's popularity with music fans. And OpenAI says one of its accounts on X was hacked. They say someone sent out posts asking users to click through a crypto token that it claimed was related to the company, but it wasn't. Shares of AutoZone lower, now up. They were lower. They're now up nearly 1%. It reported comparable sales for the fourth quarter missed estimates, but sales per store square foot surge over 44%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. David Gura and Tom Keene here at the Plaza Hotel, and of course Bloomberg Surveillance wherever we go. Brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access Interactive Brokers' vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. There are no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. We have an eclectic group of guests here talking about this great bull market. And if you lead the shop at Investec for years and then go over to 91 and look at investment in sustainability, you have some experience at what to do in bull markets. Hendrik de Toy joins us right now with 91. Welcome. There's one simple question in America. ESG is in retreat, period. What do you see as the future of climate investment within the public markets?
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, David. I think we have to change the debate. Whether ESG is good or bad is a moot point. We have to invest in a way in which global economic growth and well-being of humans can be sustained for many decades from now, because that's actually when the liabilities that we look after become real. We look after the assets, and there are liabilities, people's retirement monies. That's when they need them. And so we should shift away from left, right, ESG. We should talk about what is sustainable in the true sense of the word, and what risks do we face when we invest.
Can you still state that given a climate proactive approach that you can add to growth of free cash flow or an enhancement to revenues?
At 91, we consider all risks. And therefore, one of the risks, big risks we all face is climate risk. Trust me, if you look at flooding that's happening around the world, if you look at insurance premia, etc., these risks are real. All we try to do is price the risk, but that includes other risks like financial risk, etc. And so then we have some dedicated funds where investors have asked us, would you make an impact? And we then invest according to their mandate. But the majority of the money we run, normal, benchmark cognizant, long money competing with everyone else on the street. But at some point, those risks, those embedded risks, are going to be priced by the market. Remember 2008, 2007, no one priced the risk of bad lending. Right now, no one is pricing the risk of excessive capital flow into private credit. Similarly, we price climate.
Your goal is to be socially useful in allocating capital. What does that mean in practice?
We live as investment managers in particular. We live, or we serve communities, people, ordinary people, men and women who retire, who save for their retirement. In the way we operate, we need to behave in a way which is consistent with their expectations. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we are not ideologues. We're not people who try to tell people how to live. We listen, we implement, we manage risks.
How does the message sell in Texas? We've had major firms in America, pension, responsible fiduciary money, go down to a given state like Texas, not just to pick on Texas, but how do you sell the 91 message in Texas that doesn't want to hear it?
We operate with institutional clients from right around the world, from China to California. They have different ideological views in life. They have different politics. We tell it as it is. If they want to work with us, they work with us. We're not going to change ourselves for one single mandate, but I have a very comfortable conversation with people on the political right, because we talk, and if you look at actually what's happened after the Inflation Reduction Act, it was actually the red states took advantage of it and started building for a different world. So we talk real world stuff, not ideology, and I think we've just got to get away from that.
All of a sudden, we got a guy from Belgium articulate on red and blue states. It's time for David Gura to step into the conversation.
No, I sympathize with what you're saying. I remember going to West Texas and seeing the amount of wind production that's happening there, and how much enthusiasm there is even among Republicans in Texas for that happening.
I'm beating on Texas, but Texas is leading, right?
Absolutely. Where are we in this conversation? Tom opened up by saying ESG is in retreat, so let's get away from that nomenclature. Where are we in this conversation as you look at your career trajectory and investors' openness to talking about investing in these types of products? What's the appetite like today?
15 years ago, it was a small subset. Then when everyone became aware of the climate issues and of social issues, Me Too, all these things, then it became very fashionable, and particularly in Europe. I mean, Europe ESG is still a big thing. It's not as if it's disappeared. Asia, people are pragmatic, practical. In the US, there's the ideological divide. I just think it's a maturing phase in the discussion, and it unfortunately got mixed up with politics. That will change. But remember what we exist for as investors or as third-party investment managers. We are there to price risk, to allocate capital, to make sensible long-term investment decisions, and therefore we take account of all factors. I mean, Tom will, and you will remember, 5 years ago, no one really bothered about politics. Today, political risk is a big issue.
We have time for one more question. Are we quantifying flooding? Are we quantifying larger hurricanes, the terrible, I'm going to call it typhoon cyclone that just hit Shanghai? Are we, the new weather patterns out there, are we quantifying them appropriately?
Firstly, I have a farm in South Africa. It's very important to think about it, quantify, read. But what our industry is busy doing, and particularly, and I may say so on this channel, Bloomberg, building up data that we can then use to build models to quantify sensibly. But the insurance industry is is quite far advanced in that already, and therefore there are some risks they're not willing to take on, which is a problem for society, and governments will have to step in.
Thank you for joining us today, Henry.
Nice
Greatly. Don't get up yet. We're still on camera. We're gonna go out here in a minute. We're doing Frank Sinatra.
Oh, sorry, you're gonna play them out. You're gonna play them out.
Here. We are at the Earthshot Prize, the Plaza Hotel. David Gura and Tom Keene. This is the selection of 15 parties to go to the 5 awards in Cape Town. Yes. You'll be in Cape Town, right? Are you the host?
We are going to be there.
Okay, this is where you say, Mike Bloomberg, send Gura and Keene.
Oh, yeah, we're angling for a
That's what we do.
I'll talk to you later today.
You got your marching orders. We are here, and we say good morning here. Again, the big news is China with some monetary stimulus. Bloomberg looking for fiscal stimulus down the road, but certainly a major announcement in China, and it lifts markets. We heard Amy Silverman at RBC talk about a genuine lift to the market and a clarity to this bull market with yields higher. And of course, with equities lifting. What do you do at the Plaza? You listen to Frank. Good morning.
Top of the heap, these little town blues are melting away. I'll make a brand new start of it in old New York. If I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere. It's up to you, New York, New
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, and Lisa Mateo. It is Bloomberg Surveillance, but a special Bloomberg Surveillance today from the venerable Plaza Hotel in New York City, the Earthshot Prize, selections of 15 nominees to go to South Africa in a number of months. Joining me today, and very appropriate, David Gura is with us here with the political churn in America and, of course, the politics of all of this climate innovation that we see really front and center. With our last guest, David, we clearly heard the distinction of Europe different than America, starkly different in this debate on innovation and climate.
Raising this very good point, though, about the Inflation Reduction Act and the appetite for a lot of the investment in these clean energy programs, clean energy technologies. I think that's kind of the tension that you were getting at over the course of the last hour is how do you get the American people to realize that, in fact, there's opportunity here when it is such a polarized issue, Tom?
In this hour, speaking of polarized issues, we will be speaking in moments with the governor of Colorado. David, I want you to brief our international audience right now on why Aurora, Colorado matters.
The former president, Donald Trump, has brought up Aurora, Colorado as this kind of boogeyman, saying that there are Venezuelan gangs running wild there, making life difficult and dangerous for the residents of what is, I believe, Colorado's third largest city there, right adjacent to Denver. We've seen the mayor of that city push back on what the former president has said, and Donald Trump has indicated he plans to make a trip to Colorado, despite people pushing back on what he said is as not factual, as untrue. So it's very much the same flavor as we've seen in terms of the commentary from the former president on Springfield, Ohio, and certainly become front and center in this campaign for President, Tom.
Staying on top of the markets today, and of course the major news is monetary stimulus that we see out of China lifting markets, and of course from our Interactive Broker Studios with that, Lisa Mateo.
You got it, and you said it. Futures, we've got green on the screen. China unveiled more measures to boost its economy. Right now, NASDAQ futures up about 1/10%, 31 points at 20,110. Dow futures up 0.1%, 44 points at 42,545. And we have S&P futures up about 4 points at 5,781. We head to the two-year yield, 3.60%. That's up 2 basis points. A yield on the 10-year, 3.79%, and that's up 4 basis points. Key benchmarks in China. Hong Kong jumped about 4%. U.S.-listed Chinese stocks advancing. You have shares of Alibaba up more than 5%. JD.com up more than 7%. Few companies making news. That's Boeing. It's sweetened the pay package to its striking workers. It's offering a 30% bump. The terms final, only valid until the end of Friday, but union leaders just say that's not enough time. Meanwhile, Boeing and Airbus supplier Spirit AeroSystems, they're reviewing 14 years of internal records, discovered errors with paperwork for aircraft parts that it manufactured. And finally, shares of Visa, they're down about 2%. Sources say the Justice Department is planning to file an antitrust case against the company as soon as today. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. On the politics of the moment, there's no one better than David Gura to be looking state by state. But when you slice and dice 50 states for this election of November 5th, there's no question Colorado can be front and center with a really rich and interesting politics. I like the ballot that the governor of Colorado put as a ballot initiative, which is to bring back Tulagis in Boulder, Colorado. The shutting down of Tulagis as a club was a national scandal. I hope he can bring Tulagis back.
We'll get into that. We'll let Tom wax nostalgic about his time at the Sink, his time on the Hill. Maybe we'll talk about Tom's Tavern on Pearl Street as well. But we're here at the Earthshot Summit at the Plaza Hotel on this Tuesday morning. With us now, the 43rd governor of the state of Colorado, Jared Polis, who is, of course, a supporter of and a surrogate for the Harris-Walz campaign. And Governor Polis, great to speak with you. And I got to start with what has been in the news. We talked about it just a moment ago. That is the degree to which Aurora, Colorado has been in the news. And I saw an interview on KUSA on 9 News in Colorado. Your former congressional colleague, Mike Kaufman, now the mayor of that city, evincing a kind of unease as he was asked about whether he would stand by former President Trump as he came to Aurora for a rally to address what he's been talking about over and over again. That is what's really an apparition here, the dangers, the dangers as he describes them of Venezuelan gangs in that city. Give us a sense of what's really happening on the ground there in Aurora.
Well, I mean, the way the former president talks about it is, frankly, one of the reasons he's so unpopular here. I mean, Aurora is a thriving city. I was there last week. Most residents are enjoy living in one of our most culturally diverse cities in the state. Violent crime has been down 2 years in a row. Car thefts are way down 2 years in a row. They have a new police chief. We've been working with them on law enforcement for a number of different years. So, I mean, that's the reality in Aurora. And then you have somebody talking about it like it's some alternate reality place, and Coloradans just sort of roll their eyes and say, that's not us.
Governor, we look at the latest polling, which has gotten pretty granular, especially on the state-by-state level, looking at the issues that matter most to voters. And chief among them in the latest set of polls we've gotten has been the economy, has been inflation. What are you hearing from Coloradans about that? And what more does the ticket you support need to do to make the case that they're going to make life better for those who are still struggling, still dealing with the effects of high inflation and higher prices?
Certainly, high costs and inflation are one of the big challenges we face, and I think that the type of thing that we saw from the Wharton School, Penn came out and said that Donald Trump's big spending plan would increase the deficit more than 2 times more than Kamala Harris's plan. People understand that this kind of big spending mentality is inflationary. That's more of what the former president brought last time he was president. It's what he's likely to bring again. I think Kamala Harris has a responsible plan. It encourages entrepreneurship, innovation, really leans into the opportunity economy from the bottom up, and doesn't rely on big government spending like Donald Trump.
Governor, you were living there for decades, way back before this fractious politics, the Latino vote and the turnout. What is your prediction for the size of the Latino vote in Colorado, and particularly the youth vote that many say finds an affection with the former president?
There's a lot more excitement now with Kamala Harris as the nominee. I think this was a legitimate problem when Joe Biden was talking about running again, especially among the younger vote. I think we now have a candidate that really speaks to a new generation, to their aspirations, to their goals. And I'm getting a lot of excitement, whether I'm at our campuses at CU and DU and CSU, or whether it's at our community colleges or in stores and in restaurants. I think people really get that she has an agenda that works for them. Our Latino population in Colorado is incredibly diverse, right? We have people that have been, families that have been here hundreds of years. We have families that arrived here a generation or two ago. Like any group, there's a broad political diversity among them. Overwhelmingly, of course, Latino voters, just like all Coloradans, are supporting Kamala Harris and what she offers to bring down inflation, secure our border, and help grow opportunity.
Governor, you've gotten to know the vice president's running mate through his service on the Democratic Governors Association. I imagine you've gotten to know him well over the course of that. Tom asked me yesterday on air sort of what he can bring to states like Arizona and Colorado. As he makes his way along that campaign trail, and it's bound to get busier, what do voters want to hear from him? What does he offer that the vice president doesn't, that the incumbent president didn't offer before him? What's he able to do to kind of galvanize or energize the electorate there in Colorado?
So, you know, Tim Walz was somebody I served with in the United States Congress as well. This is somebody who won a red district in United States Congress. How? By really understanding and being authentic with people. I mean, this is a guy who can get along with almost anybody. He's comfortable in his own skin. He's able to hear people where they're at and help them imagine a better world for themselves and others. So that's really who Tim is, and through his service to our country in the military as a teacher, he's really put his work where his mouth is, and people are really excited across the country to get to know him as our next vice president.
Governor, how do you feel about the tradition? And I'm going to go back to Ronald Reagan, who maybe was on the right and ran to the center. In the days to November 5th, are we going to see the vice president run to the middle and become verbally less progressive and more centrist, as maybe we see from Jared Polis?
Well, look, I mean, she is who she is. She obviously evolves on issues and learns just like any of us do. It's a different job to be a DA. It's a different job to be a senator from California. It's a different job to be vice president. And it's a different job to want to be the next president of all America. And that's really what she's leading into. She wants to be a uniter. She's the person we need as America approaches our 250th anniversary in 2026. We don't need a nation divided. We need a nation united. And that means somebody who speaks to everybody. And that's why conservative Republicans, liberal Democrats, moderates are all flocking to Kamala Harris, including former Vice President Dick Cheney.
On the vice president, you say she is who she is. I think there are a lot of people still in this country who don't know who she is, and we see that in the polling data as well. Is she doing herself a disservice by not doing more interviews, doing more one-on-ones with reporters? How do you respond to that? It's great to speak with you this morning, to have the opportunity to do so, of course, but is she missing an opportunity by not doing more of that herself, do you think?
She's a thoughtful, diligent leader who studies the issues, and she's a prosecutor who put criminals behind bars, stared them in the face. Nothing's harder than that. Look, she is doing more interviews, and I'm sure she'll do even more going forward. She's working very, very hard on the campaign trail, doing far more campaign events and outreach than her opponent. I think that'll help carry the day in November.
Governor, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg this morning. The Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, greatly appreciated. Here at the Earthshot Prize Award. We've got to look back to the markets today and really look. I'm looking at renminbi, which is after the monetary goosing, if it's a really fancy term, David.
Yes.
The goosing that we finally saw. This has been widely hoped for, fiscal and monetary. Today we got a set of monetary announcements which showed stronger yuan, 7.03, rates lifting worldwide essentially. That's price down, yield up, and equity markets pretty positive about it, David. And then the next step is to get to the fiscal adjustment that most experts say China desperately needs.
Tom, it's a treat to sit next to you after this has happened, because I know that there are a few people who understand the nuances and flavors of global central banks as well as you. Help us understand the magnitude, the uniqueness of what the PBOC has done this morning. We talk a lot about central bank convergence, the powers of some that have dual mandates and some that don't. This seems like extraordinary action. How extraordinary is it, would you say?
It's really scientific, folks, and it's not out of textbooks. I stood in Shanghai 20 years ago outside a big construction site and frankly saw poverty that I really had never witnessed in my life. There's exactly one metric to the Chinese leadership: labor unrest and protest in China. I'm not up to speed on that, but in each and every case, David, I've ever seen, the catalyst for Beijing action is protest and labor unrest. And with this slowdown, you clearly have the labor unrest.
We'll be talking a lot about sustainable investment here over the course of this morning, but we're also going to be weaving into that conversations about what happened in China and the effects on the markets. And Curran, our colleague, now in Washington, D.C., spent a good chunk of time in Hong Kong writing about just what we were talking about a moment ago. Right. So eager to bring him into the conversation, talk about foreign exchange as well coming up. So we will stay abreast of what's happening in the markets.
Right. Audrey Child-Friedman also scheduled to be with us here on the currency markets and that lift in yuan as well. You see it was sterling. I can't afford to go to Europe. I mean, 134. You give me a 113 euro, I'm canceling the trip. There's that 703 renminbi for those of you on YouTube. Let us tell you about how we commute every morning. We commute across the nation on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Good morning, the corridor. 99.1 FM in Washington, Bloomberg 1130 in New York, and of course 92.9 FM in Boston. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. David Gura and Tom Keene, the Earthshot Prize. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. A slight lift to the markets after stocks closed at another record high. Investors now awaiting data on the Fed's preferred price metric and U.S. personal spending. That's later this week. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 30 points at 20,110. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 52 points, 42,553. And S&P futures up about 3 points at 5,780. We have the two-year yield at 3.59%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that's up 3 basis points. Stocks in China, Hong Kong surged more than 4% after a string of stimulus measures from China aimed at shoring up some economic growth. The stock 600 in Europe, that index right now, up about 0.5%, and that's led by sectors with heavy exposure to China, including miners, luxury good makers, automakers as well. A few companies making news. Chevron, sources say its $53 billion purchase of Hess expected to get the nod by the FTC as soon as this week. You have Chevron up nearly 1%, Hess up more than 2%. And Maersk getting ready for potential labor disruptions. It's implementing a local port disruption surcharge. It's for all cargo moving to and from the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast terminals. That takes place October 21st. And finally, shares of Starbucks lower, down about 0.5%. It got a downgrade from Jefferies to underperform from hold and set a new street low target. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. And this is really a day where we're remote, where Bloomberg News Now really works. They come out every hour or even more than that. Subscribe to that podcast, YouTube podcast, Apple podcast. I really can't say enough about what we're doing at Bloomberg News Now. And David, you live this at NPR. I'm going to suggest NPR invented this rapid delivery of news, and we're doing it with a Bloomberg difference.
And extraordinarily well, as you say, updated so constantly. You're not going to miss out on news as it develops. And of course, the great benefit that we bring to you, our listeners, people who subscribe to the Bloomberg, is just that immediacy, that sense of up-to-date information. We are definitely translating that over to audio online as well.
Look for that on economics, finance, and investment. And of course, on Audrey Child-Friedman's foreign exchange market, joining us from London with the news of China, the stronger renminbi, the weaker dollar a bit, Audrey Child-Friedman. Audrey, what is the impact to us and the impact to Beijing if we get a further strengthening in renminbi through 7, 6.99, 6.95? Who's counting? What are the ramifications of a stronger Chinese currency?
So a stronger Chinese currency will feed through the inflation channel, but I would say it's more of a story for the Chinese economy than it is for the US economy, in a way that, the US is still a relatively closed economy, and that's why when it comes to potential further tariff and potential rhetoric about global trade war, the US and the US dollar generally is always better positioned.
I'm unsure if they did this monetary stimulus today because the Fed cut interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. But Audrey, do you have a new framework for the dollar? Can you say that we have in place a vector that describes a weaker dollar?
So first of all, on today's action, I would say the stimulus that was announced today wasn't a major surprise. What was a surprise is that they deliver a wide range of different measures at the same time, and the timing was probably a little bit earlier than what we kind of were expecting. So that's why I think the market action and the market reaction was quite significant. And yes, you rightly say that this comes just after the Fed gives a 50 bips rate cut last week. But the dollar really last week didn't sell off any further after that announcement. And I think this kind of opens a wide range of question marks as to, what is the scenario, what is the context that triggers the next leg lower in the dollar? Is just talking about lower Fed fund rates into year end and into next year enough to drive the dollar any lower? Or do we need something else? Do we need better news outside of the US? And I think we do. I mean, in particular, in the G10 context, if you look at euro-dollar, a euro-dollar has been doing really well, but it's been very much driven by the US dollar weakness side of the trade. And Europe actually has been, the headline out of Europe have been really poor. So what I'm thinking is that we need some better news out of Europe if we want, this euro-dollar, for instance, this euro-dollar push higher to continue, and if we want to break into 112 and potentially towards 115.
Help us understand what that catalyst in Europe might be. I'm just thinking as you speak, both about what happened in China and with the Federal Reserve, how the novelty of a surprise seems to have diminished some. I think even with the Fed's decision to go 50 basis points, we knew they were going to cut. Didn't seem like a huge amount of surprise. You're saying that there wasn't a huge amount of surprise with today's announcement in China, say for the timing of it. As you look to Europe, what do you think might be that catalyst, that good news that you think that the market so sorely needs?
Well, actually, ironically, China's story, China's cyclical story narrative with those announcements today, that should improve. It doesn't solve the long-term structural problem that China is facing, but the cyclical elements should improve. And that's very good news for Europe, for Germany in particular. What we need in Europe, to answer your question, is some improvement out of the German economy. It's kind of a coincidence today that the German IFO index was yet again underwhelming and disappointing and showing a pretty bleak picture out of Germany. And we've had some of the economies in Europe doing well, like Italy, Spain, but France and Germany are the two largest economies in Europe. And we need to see some improvement on the cyclical front, on that front. So if it's export driven, that would be great, but we're not there just yet.
Audrey, one final question, if we could, and that would be the concept of continental austerity. Are we finally drifting away from not France, but Germany, Netherlands austerity? Is that finally shifting towards a more American, a more British model?
I think we need to see that in Europe. Whether we will, and specifically whether Germany will endorse that approach, I think is highly questionable and highly unlikely. And that's a problem. That's the reason why the long-term growth potential for Europe stays lower and below the US is one.
Very valuable. Audrey Child-Freeman, thank you so much, particularly those immediate comments we saw out of China today. Again, the yuan advancing from 7.XX down to 7.03, really remarkable move there. My basic theme, David, for corporations is they will adapt and adjust. I would respectfully suggest that China is adapting and adjusting to a maximum slowdown in crisis.
When you look at that adjustment, Tom, as you say, there's the monetary policy side and the fiscal side. So we're looking at this significant rate cut. We're looking at this change to reserves, what banks need to hold in China. Then there is kind of the fiscal component as well. And you were speaking so eloquently just about the level of poverty, housing, labor in China. Which of those two is paramount, or do you see them in complement and see them as equally important?
There's a lot of Foreign Affairs magazines really some great leadership on this. And the bottom line is the way they clear bankruptcy is they clear it by clearing the market and bringing it back over into state-owned enterprises. If they do all what they need to do and just reinvigorate a state-owned enterprise, that doesn't get it done. And that method, which they've tried before, it's just not going to work this time. And I think there's a real mystery. Okay, then how do we clear failed investment in China? And they just simply haven't got there yet. We'll have much more on that. We've got some wonderful China guests coming up here on short notice, which is good. Do we have Enda?
We do have Enda.
We have Enda Curran with us. That's as good as you can get. Enda Curran will join us here to review across the nation on China this morning. We're on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto in your commute. Good morning on the corridor from Washington to New York to Boston. And on YouTube, thank you for joining us today with our spectacular Plaza Hotel production. On YouTube, the best way to help us, to help David Gura, is to subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a lift to the markets as China's central bank unleashed a blitz of policy support for the economy. Key benchmarks in China, Hong Kong jumped about 4%. Let's get to NASDAQ futures. Up 0.1%, 28 points, but at 20,108. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 47 points at 42,547. S&P futures up about 3 points at 5,780. The two-year yield, 3.61%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.80%, and that's up 5 basis points. We had some more Fed speak. Austin Goolsbee said with inflation approaching the central bank's target, the focus should turn to the labor market, and that likely means that many more rate cuts over the next year. And Neil Kashkari also pointed to the weakness in the job market. He said he backs lowering interest rates by another 0.5 percentage point by year end. Today, we'll hear more. We'll hear from the Fed's Michelle Bowman. Companies making news. Novo Nordisk, its CEO, testifying at a Senate hearing today. Now he's expected to blame the cost of Ozempic and Wegovy on middlemen. He says the drug prices have actually decreased. And CrowdStrike's vice president expected to testify to Congress on July's global IT outage. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Of course, the economics of the day are important, but nothing is as important as we will see Friday with the PCE inflation indicator, the key data of the week. We're still to give you that good information on Friday. Our economic indicators always brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technologies. He did better in French in school than I did. David Gura, to bring in our next guest.
We are here at the Earthshot Prize Summit, and Justine De La Salle joins us now. She's with the Mission Possible Partnership. Great to see you here in New York. And for the uninitiated, what is the partnership? Tell us a bit about the work that you do around the world.
The Mission Possible Partnership is there to decarbonize heavy industry, heavy-duty transport, what we call the harder to abate sectors. So things like steel, cement, chemicals, aviation, shipping. It's really what we're about. And we've been around for about 5-6 years now, but really refocusing over the past few years on making projects happen on the ground, really seeing green industrial projects get to construction stage.
What has been the number one hurdle to getting that done as you try to work with them to accelerate, to make them happen first and foremost, but also to accelerate them?
Look, I think the biggest hurdle we have is currently there's a green premium for most of those green commodities. You could also say a dirty discount is the fact that we're not paying the pollution. That means that we have a premium. And that premium is hindering demand. Buyers don't want to buy a green product at a higher price than the alternative. So we really need to find ways of encouraging buyers of those commodities, buyers of steel, for instance, the automotive sector, to buy a green product, even if it costs a little bit more.
You were at LSE in economic history. Tim Besley used to lecture there. You better know your history or you're not going to get it done. Here's my history. When I was a kid, I couldn't breathe in Los Angeles. I couldn't see the mountains. I lived personally, with many other Americans, the actual greening of the air in LA. At the margin, how much further can we go without undue cost?
I think we can really go a long way with the technologies we have, both in terms of addressing local air pollution and the broader climate issue and CO2 and methane emissions in those sectors. And heavy industry and heavy duty transport represents roughly 30% of emissions in the energy system. So it's far from being ridiculous in terms of amount of emissions. And we can get there because even if the price premium today is a bit high, this will come down with economies of scale.
Everybody, Faustine, I've spoken to here has a certain climate angle. You have the toughest job in climate, which is ugly, heavy industry, polluting. And I go back to Liz's economy, the river runs black. On China, have they really made headway, or are they still a massive coal pollutant, that cloud coming across the Pacific Ocean?
I think it's a mixed picture from China.
Fair.
They are still producing very bad stuff, no doubt, but are also doubling down on investment on clean technologies because they see the interest of being the major green industrial power of the future. They've done it on solar PV, they've done it on electric vehicles, they're doing it again on green industry. And there's a real risk that they flood the market, for instance, with electrolyzers that will be cheap electrolyzers to produce hydrogen, even if it's not the best technology
She's
around.
doing engineering on Bloomberg Science. What in God's name is an electrolyzer?
It's a piece of equipment that enables you to produce hydrogen from renewable electricity. And that piece of equipment can be manufactured at scale. And if China gets to scale very fast, they can keep bringing the cost down and really flood the global market.
You have to make the case to executives, to companies to do this. You also have to make the case to governments. And I'm very curious as you look at sort of who the audience is for this event today. A lot of philanthropists, a lot of innovators, a lot of executives. How about that government piece? I think in this country, the role that the government plays in accelerating kind of the transfer or the movement toward these new technologies. How critical is that, and how disparate is that when you look at the world, the role that government is playing in this transition?
I think it's absolutely critical. And the first few projects in those sectors have happened primarily thanks to significant subsidies, but also a great amount of corporate leadership. Companies ready to take a risk, and a significant risk, on the first project. But they can't bankroll the whole transition based on that level of risk as private companies.
Will that always be the case? Do you see that happening in perpetuity, that role of government, of subsidy, has to continue?
No, I think we have a window of opportunity in the next 10 years because we know how technology deployment works, right? Initially it goes slow, then you hit a tipping point, economies of scale kick in, and then you hit an exponential curve. And so we need to get to that tipping point in those harder to abate sectors. And until then, we need massive intervention from government. But beyond that, the market forces will play out quite naturally.
In Lille, France, you've got, I think it's called Gravelines. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but you got a nuclear component. Now we have Microsoft teaming up with Constellation to bring back 3 Mile Island. You two are too young to even know what that means.
Got to know history. You just said that.
But the answer, yeah, you got to know history, like at LSE. But the answer, Faustine, is we've got these methods that we politically can't get to. How are we going to get everybody worldwide to solutions that can help heavy industry?
I think the advantage we have is that a lot of those industries rely in some shape or form on renewable electricity for decarbonization. You come back to that. And we see tremendous momentum on renewable electricity in terms of pace of deployment and in terms of cost reduction. So that's the hope, is that the more we reduce the cost of renewable electricity, the cheaper it becomes to decarbonize heavy industry as well. Then we also need to appeal, I think, to the public and tell them that if we want to solve climate change, they'll need to buy low-carbon bread. The CEO of Yara mentioned that in a recent op-ed. They'll need to buy low-carbon automatives. And this is feasible, and it doesn't add a lot of cost, because even if at a B2B level, the dirty discount is high, then there's so many other costs in your final end consumer product that it dilutes and it becomes minus than 1%.
How do you look at America right now from all the climate of the Paris Accord and continental Europe being ahead of us and all? How do you perceive, with the toughest job here, America?
I think, again, mixed picture. The IRA and the Biden subsidy package.
She's a really
It's
good guess.
It's the Inflation Reduction Act.
Everything is a
No.
mixed
She's
picture.
I'm
Continue.
very French. The IRA and the Biden subsidy packages have provided a massive boost in terms of project development. But what we have seen is that then the picture varies from one state to the next, because state governments, some of them have greater regulations in place, like California, others less, like the Gulf Coast. And for instance, we've been working with our colleagues from RMI in the Gulf Coast and California, and we see projects going faster in California because on top of the IRA, you have regulation that helps create a market.
Let me ask you lastly just about the developing world. And so Tom, remembering being a kid on Sunset Boulevard and hacking because of the pollution there in Los Angeles, he brings up the extreme example of China, which we know is polluting a lot. As you look at the developing world more broadly, emerging markets more broadly, I imagine there are places where this is very acute, that they're having kind of the same experience that Tom had as a kid, where this is coming to bear in a way that's making life difficult for them. What are those places where this conversation is quite vital, but maybe there isn't the kind of subsidies that we've been talking about, government interest, and sort of where do you see the most opportunity in emerging markets in the developed?
I think you have two types of markets in emerging markets. Markets like India that already have a significant industry and need to invest massively in the next generation as well. I mean, the demand for steel or cement is booming in India. And so there, the challenge is to build green, the plants that are going to be built in the next 10 years. And Fernandez will need development finance, but the Indian government also understood that they have a chance to use hydrogen as a powerful force for green industrialization. And then you have countries that do not have an industrial base today. Think of countries like Namibia, Morocco, Chile to some extent. Those countries have an enormous potential because they can produce cheap renewable electricity in huge amounts. Right. So they can produce cheap renewable hydrogen in huge amounts, and they can become industrial powers in the future.
This has been fabulous. Faustine, thank you so much. Faustine Delassalle with this Mission Possible on really the toughest part of this debate, heavy industry and climate. Let's do this. Let's go right to the news, our world headquarters. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, Lisa. In Lebanon, about 560 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes in the past 2 days. As the conflict at the border continues to deepen, the strikes have wounded more than 1,600. It's been the deadliest day for Lebanon in decades. Israel is attacking 1,600 sites across the country it says are being used by Hezbollah. President Biden prepares to address the UN General Assembly in New York today. More than 130 world leaders are slated to speak. The wars in Gaza and Ukraine will likely dominate the conversation. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby told ABC the president will talk about other issues as well.
We've accomplished a lot on the world stage in the United States over the last 3.5 years, revitalized our alliances and partnerships, really advanced our national security interests around the world, working on transnational problems like climate change and clean energy transition, on fentanyl prevention.
President Biden will speak around 10 a.m. Wall Street time, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Former President Donald Trump is making his voice heard in the battleground states with 42 days to go until Election Day. Trump is expected to shed light on his tax policy during a stop in Georgia today. Yesterday, Trump threatened to hit John Deere with hefty tariffs if it indeed moves some production to Mexico. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
Earlier this year, Deere said it would lay off workers in Illinois and Iowa as it says it's facing rising operational costs and declining demand. Trump at an event on American farmers and trade.
I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%.
Deere issuing a statement saying it is committed to U.S. manufacturing with $2 billion invested in domestic plants since 2019. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, Vice President Harris campaigns tomorrow in Pennsylvania, Arizona on Friday, and Nevada on Sunday. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg surveillance this morning from the Plaza in New York City, brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started. David, that was a great conversation with Faustine Delassalle.
The toughest job in the building, you say.
Without question.
But clearly has broad perspective, and I thought her insights on the developing world was fascinating.
And the China focus, of course, something we're really focused on here at Bloomberg. Enda Curran scheduled to be with us today on the news out of China. A lift to the markets, yields are higher. Please stay with us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts across the nation on Bloomberg Radio.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a lift to the market. This is after China's central bank unleashed a blitz of policy support for the economy. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 25 points at 20,105. We have Dow futures up about 40 points at 42,542, and S&P futures up about 2 points at 5,779. We have the two-year yield at 3.60%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,627 an ounce. Brent crude higher at $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. Few stocks on the move. Liberty Broadband up 21%. The cable company proposed an all-stock merger with Charter Communications. Charter shares are little changed. Walmart up nearly 1%. Truist Securities upgraded the retailer to buy from hold. But Truist, well, they didn't quite feel the same way about Costco. Their shares down about 0.5% after Truist downgraded the stock. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, before we get back to Tom and David, I am joined by John Tucker. And I may have a dumb question for you, John Tucker, but do you happen to own a Rolex?
What do you... Remember who you're talking to.
Exactly.
I have a swatch.
You have a swatch. Okay. Here's the thing, though. A lot of people have one, but the problem is that it's hard to find one, right? They're low in stock, the waiting list, weeks, years even. So the company decided like a year ago to start getting into the used market, secondary market.
So
used
sort of like
Rolex watches.
luxury car makers get into, and they're not used, they're called certified pre-owned.
I know. So we're trying to find out how's it been going, right? It's been going for a year already. So Bloomberg's Andy Hoffman, he's been looking into it. He has this great article on the terminal today. Be sure to check it out. Andy joins us now. Now, Andy, before we kind of dig into this, set the scene for us. What made Rolex decide to go this route? I mean, where is the luxury market? How much is that secondary market expected to grow?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And, Rolex has been around for over 100 years. And they never were involved in the secondary market before. So when they announced that they were going to start doing this, their own certified pre-owned program, it was a pretty big deal and quite a surprise for a lot of people. The primary luxury watch market is worth about $50 billion, we think. The secondary market, that's the sale and the trade of used watches, pre-owned watches, that's worth anywhere between $20 and $25 billion right now. And that's expected to grow quite a bit by 2030. Could be worth something like $35 billion, according to Deloitte.
Andy, I should just go down to Canal Street and get a Rolex, I guess that's the whole point, right?
That is indeed the whole point. Of course, you can do that, but what you're probably buying there is a fake. And one of the reasons that Rolex decided, there was impetus for them to get into this line of business, is because there are so many fakes out there. It's widely believed that Rolex is the most faked counterfeit watch that there is. And so what customers get when they buy a certified pre-owned watch from a Rolex authorized dealer is a watch that Rolex itself has said, this watch is correct, this watch is real, this watch is in the condition that is up to our standards. And so that's why customers are willing to pay a premium for this.
So how much more are they paying for these certified pre-owned watches?
Yeah, it's quite a bit, and it varies between authorized dealers. I mean, the program is fairly new. There's Boucherer and Tourneau, which are actually retailers that are now owned by Rolex, but people like the 1916 Company and Watches of Switzerland, these are the major retailers on the Rolex certified pre-owned side of things. And the premiums to non-CPO vary widely, anywhere from 15% to up as much as 40% compared to non-CPO used Rolex prices. So the retailers themselves are setting the prices, and they're setting the prices based on their costs, based on the margin they're trying to get, and based on what the market will bear.
Why did this all start in the first place? They're obviously trying to make money, but is there more to it than that?
Yeah, certainly it can drive profits, but that's not the real reason. The Rolex secondary market among brands is the biggest secondary watch market. There's something like 30 million used Rolexes floating around out there. And if you go on Chrono 24, one of the big secondary market, trading sites, there's over 100,000 Rolex listed listings at any one time. So what the market was looking for and what they were demanding was standards and authenticity and an understanding of what these watches should look like and what kind of condition they should be in. And so Rolex, after over 100 years of not being directly involved, has decided that they are slowly going, working with their authorized dealer network, going to slowly get into this line of business. And certainly it can grow, and it likely will grow for them.
So is it working for them? Is this making money for Rolex, this youth market?
Yeah, it's a very, very small part of their estimated over 10 billion Swiss francs in revenue that they earn from wholesale of new watches each year. But the prices that the margin that they're sort of taking is anywhere believed to be between 10 and 15% of these used watches that are being sold. And so these watches are selling anywhere from 5,000 up to, we noted one of the watches today was 110,000 francs. And that 110,000 franc price is quite interesting because it's compares to about 75,000 francs for the new comparable new model. So it's quite a premium.
When they make a watch, I envision Geppetto at his workbench and his little tools. How long does it take to make one of these things? What's so special about them? And if demand is so high, why don't they just have Geppetto make some more?
Well, it's interesting. You might be surprised to know that Rolex makes over 1 million watches a year. Now, that's an estimate. Rolex is a very reticent company. They're actually a private foundation here in Geneva, not publicly traded, and they disclose very little about their production and methods. But, part of that reason for that popularity and that understanding of the brand and what it is that Rolex has really not changed, the watches that it makes, other than making them incrementally better, from year to year. The design, the look, the way these watches appear is basically stayed the same over the last 40 or 50 years. And so that's helped to create this secondary market and trade in these watches, because a watch from 1985 might look quite similar to one that was produced in 2015.
All right, Bloomberg's Andy Hoffman, thank you for joining us.
What do you suppose
morning.
I get for my used swatch?
You did not much, John Tucker.
How do you know?
I don't know. Well, you know what? Today is my 25th wedding anniversary, so maybe I should ask for a rollie. No? Too much.
He's lasted 25 years with you?
I'm telling you, it's hard work being married to me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That was a great segment. All right, so here in New York City, right, we're starting to see the leaves change. Not so much. I went up to Lake George. I saw the leaves change, but we're starting to get this little fall feel in New York City. Do you see it, John Tucker? Do you see it? Is it down in the Jersey Shore? Not yet?
Yeah, a little cooler, so I'm not swimming in the ocean anymore. So
but no fall
is definitely
foliage?
here.
Nothing like that? No?
Not yet. Some of the trees are actually dying, but...
Okay. Well, I went up to Lake George. We're starting to see that fall feel. So we decided, we always pick these songs at the end of this at the segment. All right. So we're getting a little song. It's a little autumn in New York. Who sings this one? A little Tony Bennett. Is that just for you, John Tucker?
Just for me.
There you go. A little
So
Tony
romantic,
Bennett
Lisa,
for you.
on your anniversary.
This morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Autumn in New York. It spells the thrill of first nighting. Glittering crowds and shimmering clouds. canyons of steel. They're making me feel I'm home.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Sweeney on sabbatical. Joining me today at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, David Gura, for what's been a really informative time around climate, around the whole debate of engineering innovation to solve some of the huge problems that we have. You were worried about the Mants in Brooklyn falling into the East River.
Well, yes, I was alarmed about that, but it sounds like there's a lot of good work and investment going to make sure that that doesn't happen, which is good news.
Flooding up in Boston, I think it was just because of the weather, but
and we joke, but it was serious.
It was serious flooding up there, and there's other places around the world way more serious. It is the Earthshot Prize. It is part of the effort of Bloomberg Philanthropies, and of course, Mr. Bloomberg, of course, part of Bloomberg News, Bloomberg Radio Worldwide. But I love what they say here about urgent optimism.
You love this phrase.
And the answer is, here it's about projects to get something done, not pie in the sky verbiage.
And we're hearing that from those who are finalists for this prize, but also those who've won it in the past, those working with them, both from government and philanthropy, business and government, kind of making these things a reality, and that I think is engender some optimism.
Yeah, we welcome you this morning on your commute across the nation, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Of course, the quarter, 99.1 FM Washington, our flagship at the Plaza, Bloomberg 1130. The antenna's on top of the Plaza. Okay. And also 92.9 FM up in Boston. We have two guests this segment. Enda Curran will join us with his encyclopedic expertise on China with the news overnight. And Stephen Carroll will join us from London here in a moment. Right now, from the Interactive Broker Studios, your Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got green on this screen, and this is as China unveiled more measures to boost its economy. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 36 points, 20,117. Dow futures up about 73 points, 42,574. And S&P futures up about 6 points, 5,783. Key benchmarks in China, Hong Kong jumped about 4%. U.S.-listed Chinese stocks advancing. You have shares of Alibaba up more than 5%, JD.com up more than 8%. We'll take a look at commodities commodities now. We have spot gold higher, $2,632 an ounce. Brent crude higher, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $72 a barrel. Few companies making news. That's Boeing offering striking workers a 30% pay bump. Now, the terms are final, only valid until the end of Friday, but union leaders saying it's just not enough time. Meanwhile, Boeing and Airbus supplier Spirit AeroSystems, they are reviewing 14 years of internal records. They found some errors with paperwork for aircraft parts that it manufactured. And yes, shares of Visa lower, down more than 2%. Sources say the Justice Department planning to file an antitrust case against the company as soon as today. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, Mateo, thanks so much for the news flow and the current to come up on China. But right now, with a huge news flow out of Europe, Stephen Carroll joins us. He is the voice of Bloomberg Radio in London with all sorts of academic complaint. You were a Stigler Scholar in Chicago. What was it like for you, UC Dublin and Nanterre and all that? What was the first day in Chicago like?
Cold. The start of it, exactly. We were pretty lucky with the weather, but I mean, look, you arrive at Summer University of Chicago and they say, oh yeah, we have the most Nobel Prize winners on our staff, and you think, okay, that's a good start. And at the time, Austin Goolsbee was there, someone who obviously we talk about a lot now. So it was a very interesting experiment to delve into a world that meeting lots of people who you've been reading for years, getting to sit with them face to face and hear about their ideas and thinking about big themes for the economy. Very helpful for our day-to-day job.
Hugely coveted award in journalism to be part of the Stigler Center in Chicago. I've got to go to your true expertise on France, where I've got fancy Bloomberg indices showing, oops, France is now some form of economic equivalency to Spain. How messed up is France?
Short term, it doesn't look good, but you have to remember that France, short and long term, has never had spectacular growth or spectacular recession. France did reasonably well during the global financial crisis because of state intervention there as well. The issue now for France is political direction. They've got a government they've put together. Michel Barnier, hugely respected politician in France and in Europe.
Oh, come on, the left is in an absolute uproar.
And that's going to make it really difficult for them to make law. But the question are, what will be the key issues that they're going to be able to drive through? We're here talking about climate innovation here. That's something that the French government is at the forefront of doing under Emmanuel Macron's government. They've been putting money into this. They've been driving public investment into this area as well. They say this new government will be able to keep those priorities. Will they be able to pass any of those measures through Parliament?
Stephen, Tom, enticing you here with croissant coffee and talk of the University of Chicago. But really, what brings you to town, and what have you noticed sort of about the conversations that have been happening around the 79th meeting of the UN General Assembly?
Well, that's part of what I'm here. I'm popping up at Business Week later on today. We'll be back here at the Plaza for that too with Carol Masser. But the questions, I mean, a lot of the focus is around the situation in the Middle East and how different countries are approaching their own foreign policy to this as well. There is a divergence across the European continent of how different countries want to approach this issue. The sensitivities are obviously different for historical reasons in different countries too. And it's been a question around how Europe has a singular foreign policy.
I just figured this out. He's substituting for Tim?
Yes. Stanovic.
When you need a substitute in London, we're available. Okay,
we're the rail replacement bus service.
No one briefed me on this.
Would you have done it?
I would have gone to London. No. Business Week. I go over to London any time.
Can I ask a last question just about this moment in the UK? And of course, we had the Labour Party conference yesterday. What stood out to you? You're following it from afar, but how critical was that meeting?
Did you get the suit from somebody? I mean, that's the uproar in London, right?
This is
people addressing the Prime Minister.
Yeah. No, nobody sadly donated me a suit for that. But it is an interesting moment for the Labour Party. They're in a very difficult, they won this huge election victory, and it's kind of easy to forget that because since then it feels like it's been a series of quite minor scandals, but because the messaging from the government has been, we've no money and we can't do any of our big policy ideas and it's going to be difficult, and these messaging that we've heard both from the Prime Minister and from the Chancellor about the difficult fiscal decisions that are going to come in the budget at the end of October, that's the framing that we've had for the Labour Party conference. What the party's been trying to do in the early speeches that we've seen is to re-inject that confidence and a bit of optimism that we had in the immediate aftermath of the election, but seems to have fizzled over the summer.
In your free time, do something about Tottenham. Stephen Carroll, thank you so much. Of course, with Carol Masser this afternoon, Bloomberg Business Week. Because of the news, we rip up the script, which we do, with the expertise of Enda Curran for years, particularly during the pandemic, with us in Hong Kong and now centered in Washington. And on the monetary stimulus today, What is the level of desperation of the leadership in Beijing?
It was a very unusual move. The way it was announced, Tom, gathering a press conference of the top officials, top economic regulators. You don't see that very often in Beijing. The measures they put out signal, at the very least, urgency, I would say, perhaps not yet desperation, but they said they're going to bring down interest rates across the board for banks, for mortgage holders. There's some other measures around offering liquidity for those investing in the stock market and more support for banks in terms of bank capital. So it was across the board sweeping range of measures that at the very least suggest authorities are quite worried about the economy. They want to signal urgency, and they did this as a kind of a measure of confidence to get things going again. But I think the overall reaction from analysts watching closely has been a bit more mixed than they would have hoped for.
And with fond memories of sitting next to Tom as he asks you about the bar at the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, good to speak with you here this morning. And I want to ask you about the efficacy of these moves. We've talked a lot about through the monetary policy side and the fiscal side as well. You talk about the message that the Chinese government wants to sell, the confidence that they want to send to the Chinese people. How effective are these moves likely to be as you sort of look at them this morning and sort of gauge how massive they are?
Yeah, so I think the entire rest of the world has been looking on at China's economy, David, and saying, when will they turn a corner and when will they rev things up? I don't think most analysts would say that these range of interest rate cuts or monetary easing will be enough in themselves to turn things around. There's the argument about pushing on a string. It's not about the price of money in China. It's the fact that the appetite for borrowing and spending just isn't there. There are deeper structural issues, and a lot of their action overnight to the China moves has been less about looking at the central bank and more about when will the government spend more money. That's where the real challenge is. And government spending in China is actually behind where they've budgeted because of blockages at the local government level. But most people will say this is about spending more money, not about cutting interest rates.
And is there labor unrest? Is there protest, silent protest, that we don't hear across China?
It's always difficult to judge or at least be scientific about it, Tom, but we certainly have been reporting that given the unemployment rate for young people, for example, in particular, record graduates coming on the jobs market, not having the opportunities that they've had before, we've reported there is discontent there. And of course, writ large, I think there's a feeling that there is downward pressure on house prices, on people's wages, on the opportunities for higher earnings, say if you're in the banking sector, for example. So there's no doubt there's a dampening effect on the broader consumer and on the broader economy. But there's nothing to suggest that the authorities are concerned about that just yet. They're not facing any kind of existential threat. And if anything, they're now moving, or at least they're signaling that they are trying to move now as a matter of urgency to try and turn things around and make sure they hit that growth target for this year.
And I want to ask you about the surprise factor here. And Audrey Child-Freeman, we spoke with earlier, our colleague on Bloomberg Intelligence, she said she wasn't surprised by the move itself, but perhaps by the timing of it. Situate this for us, if you would, kind of in a broader sweep here of what the Chinese government, what the PBOC in particular is trying to do, and sort of if this sets up more moves like this, do you think, in the future?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a good observation, Dave. What they're trying to do here is to kind of set out the narrative that the authorities are aware of what's going on. Look at this very unusual gathering. We're sending out our top officials to act on this. We're facing the public. This is a rare kind of appearance by these officials, certainly at least in this context. And they're making the point that they have levers that they can pull, and they're going to do so. In this case, they're bringing down borrowing costs, bringing down interest rates. Now, of course, the economists and the wonks will argue about whether that's enough or not, but the signalling effect is what's important here. The authorities are acknowledging there are problems. They acknowledge they want to act on that, and they're signaling that more will follow. But it's the more will follow, I think, is where we really get in the weeds here. If you're a global investor or you're a global watcher of China, you're saying this probably isn't enough to get it where it needs to be.
And quickly here, central bank independence in China, I can't believe it exists, does it?
No, it doesn't. The central bank governor would have been sent out to announce this, Tom. This certainly wouldn't have been the PBOC's policy on their own. This is the State Council, this is the government of China. They've collectively, the various economic agencies, come together, agreed on this from the very top level down, and then handed that to the PBOC to go out and announce and implement it. And as I say, this is the monetary side of it. The real action will be in the fiscal side of it, and the expectation is that that's still to come.
Enda, thank you so much. On short notice from Washington, Enda Curran driving all of our economic coverage as well. We look for analogs here, and I'm going to take a conservative view. I don't think there's an analog. China's an absolutely unique monetary fiscal experiment.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little earlier, kind of the role that it plays in this broader system of central banks around the world, and great to hear Enda's perspective on that, just sort of the uniqueness of that institution.
Did we just have two Irish guests?
We did.
Is that what we
went
did?
to university together.
You went to university together? What is this, a cabal?
We're taking.
Read the billboard. That was the Irish government sponsor.
Francine Lacroix in the building.
She is. She is moderating a panel shortly here at the Earthshot Summit, which I'm glad that we mentioned. We should mention why we're here. We're not just at the Plaza for fun. The Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit here in New York City, and many more guests to come throughout the day. As Stephen mentioned, he'll be hosting this afternoon Bloomberg Radio throughout the day here from the Plaza Hotel.
Very good. Nice job of that. We got a lift to the market as well. Yields are higher this morning, and I'm watching renminbi 7.03 on YouTube, on radio across the nation. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing this after stocks close at another record high. Investors now waiting for data on the Fed's preferred price metric and U.S. personal spending. That comes out later this week. So we have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, 55 points at 20,135. Dow futures up 0.2%, 96 points, 42,598. And S&P futures up 0.1%, 9 points at 5,786. We have the 2-year yield 3.59%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%. That's up 4 basis points. We head over to the bond market. We just did that. We head over to commodities. Up about 0.1%. At spot gold, $2,633 an ounce. We have Brent crude is higher at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. Stocks in China, Hong Kong surged more than 4%. A string of stimulus measures from China aimed at shoring up economic growth. And then the stock 600 up about 0.6%. That was led by sectors heavy exposure to China: miners, luxury goods makers, automakers. Few companies making news. That's Chevron. Sources say its $53 billion purchase of Hess expected to get the nod by the FTC as soon as this week. And Maersk getting ready for potential labor disruptions. They're implementing a local port disruption surcharge for all cargo that's moving to and from the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast terminals. And shares of Starbucks, they're down 0.5%, a downgrade from Jefferies to underperform from Hold. They also set a new street low target. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. David Gura and Tom Keene here. And I do want to point out, and when we do remotes now, folks, I almost 100% work off the wonderful Bloomberg mobile app. I really can't say enough about it.
Anywhere.
And for Global Wall Street, off of China, there's been a little bit more bid to equities. It's ever so slight, 0.2%. But there's a little bit of a confirmation of what we saw out of China. We see that in the yield space, David. I know you are riveted by the 2-cent spread.
I am riveted by it. And your phone, which is gigantic.
Well, yeah, you know, we've got the new beast here. I'm trying to help Tim Cook out here. You know, he's beleaguered over at Apple, the 10-year yield, 3.79%. The 30-year bond, 3.99. We're back out to 4.14. And we welcome our conversation of the day on yield price. Ian Lingen joins us from BMO Capital Markets. Ian, if we're beyond curve inversion, back to the normal difference in 10-year yield and 2-year yield, can you say all clear from inversion angst?
I would say that it's fair to characterize us as having moved into a new regime of positive sloping yield curves, not just in the US, but increasingly from a global perspective. And it's important to keep in mind this occurred because the Fed started cutting, not because we had some big sell-off in the long end of the curve. While there might still be a case to be made for higher 10-year yields from here, I think we're going to be in a range for the next few months at least.
Right. Ian, you know how much I hate the parlor game of what the Fed is going to do, but do you have any interest at BMO about where the terminal value is of this trajectory of lower rates? Is that opaque and diffuse, or do you have a clearer picture of where we're heading?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it's going to play out in one of two ways. One is we get back to neutral, which is, at least from the Fed's perspective, 2.75 to 3%. Or something's going to break on the path to neutral, and we're targeting, let's call it 1.5% if there's a spike in the unemployment rate or a bigger slowdown in the real economy. I suspect that it will look like we're going to neutral until things turn for the real economy, and then they'll actually have to ease instead of cut.
Ian, while Tom sits out the parlor game, let me play, if I could, and we've fumbled our way through the blackout period to the rate cut, and now we have this kind of cacophony of speakers, policymakers, talking about the move that the Fed made last week, and we can kind of pick apart the absence of unanimity, so much as we had one at that meeting last week. What are you listening for, and help us understand the balance for someone like you between, yes, the data, which we've heard over and over again is so signal, so important to these policymakers, and sort of the dialogue around the cuts and the path forward?
One of the biggest unknowns at this moment is, has 50 basis points become the new 25 basis point cut? Should we expect a 0.5 point at November and December? To some extent, that will be data dependent, but part of it is also going to be the framing that policymakers are going to offer this week in terms of the magnitude of the cut. Now, obviously, they're not going to tell us the precise size of November's move, but they will give us some guidance insofar as whether it was simply a one-off front loading or a front loading of cuts is a multiple meeting event.
Ian, we've talked a lot about policy divergence among these many central banks, and I'd love to ask you just about the response that we've seen to this cut by the Fed next week. Sort of look forward for us, the way in which other central banks are watching and processing what the Fed has done and might do going forward here, sort of how that shapes or influences their perspective going forward.
Well, I do think the fact that given the relevance of the Fed, the relevance of the size of the U.S. economy, by simply starting the rate normalization process, it affords other major central banks the ability to either accelerate their normalization process or to get involved with cutting rates if their respective economies suggest that that's the case. There's little question that the Fed's cut has given China a little bit more flexibility to become more dovish, as we saw overnight.
Ian, is cash moving with the shock of the Fed 50 beeps, with the readjustment worldwide? Is comfortable money market fund cash finally moving?
I think that we are starting to see money market funds be deployed further out the curve, whether that's into 2-year yields or whether that's into risk assets. It will depend on one's risk profile. But I think that this is the point in the cycle where people are starting to become more interested in locking in some type of return and locking in some type of yield, because money market returns are going to decrease as the Fed cuts.
Right. Ian, very quickly here, do you see the election playing into price dynamics in bonds?
I do think that there's some reflationary angst associated with who, regardless of which party it is, retakes the White House. So I do think that we still will have a little bit of upward pressure resulting from what happens in November.
Ian, thank you so much. Ian Lingen, your brief this morning from BMO Capital Markets. I can't say enough about his research note and ability. The minutia of it is really extraordinary. And it does go into the politics of the moment. You get out the calendar. I mean, I'm looking at the baseball season, but you know, you get out the calendar and you go to October 1, and there's going to be a debate. Are they in preparation right now? Are they doing the same thing Vice President Harris did?
They are, as I understand it. And Pete Buttigieg, I think, was playing the role of J.D. Vance in the mock debates that we had Governor Walz
for the Democrats.
For the Democrats. I'm not sure about the Republican side. I will say that Senator Vance has been on the campaign trail an awful lot. I mean, former President Trump has been out there, but J.D. Vance going to Georgia and to Michigan, doing a ton of rallies and events, and trying to keep the focus squarely on both the economy and immigration going forward.
We spoke to the governor of Colorado today. South, you say Arizona is a key state.
Yes, Arizona, a hugely important state, and that was kind of made, put in starker relief yesterday when we got the latest polling from the New York Times and Siena College, indicating that Kamala Harris has fallen behind in that state. Of course, Joe Biden won it the last time around by not a huge margin. That's a state that she's really counting on, and we're kind of looking now, piecing together what these paths forward are for each of these candidates. They need to get those 270 electoral college votes.
It's on a need-to-know basis, folks. I never know what David Gura's next The Big Take is. They're not allowed to know it. Even better, David Gura doesn't know what his
I don't know.
next
After the
big
show, we'll
take
find out.
is. This morning, look to David Gura for The Big Take. It's an outstanding 20 minutes plus dialogue on a chosen topic, typically wrapped around the politics of the moment. We're wrapped around that important announcement that Enda Curran provided wisdom on in China. Finally, Beijing reacts to a real shocking crisis. Just to give you one chart, folks, on YouTube, the hand works. M1 is just straight down. There's no other way to put it, but a real deflation scare. Their deflation is, you know, people make jokes about it, David, but deflation in China is not funny. It's got a real societal impact.
A few minutes left here at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit with us here. Our coverage continues throughout the day, but we'll talk a bit about AI and a bit about financial regulation coming up here in the rest of the hour.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo with Tom Keene and David Gura. We have your opening bell report. Now, so far this morning, stock futures have seen a slight lift. Global equities rallying. This is all after China announced that string of stimulus aimed at shoring up economic growth. How will the markets react when we get things started on Wall Street? All to this news. Let's find out as we get things rolling. S&P 500, we'll start there. Up about 0.1%, 9 points at 5,727. We'll get to the Dow. Little changed, up about 10 points at 42,140. And the NASDAQ up about 0.4%, 70 points at 18,044. We have the 2-year yield, 3.59%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.78%, and that's up 3 basis points. To commodities, spot gold higher, $2,632 an ounce. We have oil higher, Brent crude $75 a barrel, WTI crude $72 a barrel. Quick look at currencies. We have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen weaker, euro British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up about 0.2% at around 63,000. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. David Gura in for Paul Sweeney. I'm Tom Keene. We're at the Plaza for a wonderful event, the Earthshot Prize, with other festivities this afternoon as well, some important speakers. And yeah, we should mention that it's on innovation and much more engineering projects of getting things done.
Yes, getting things done, I think, is key. What can be translated to reality quickly and with the support of philanthropy and government, all of whom are gathered here at the Plaza with us today.
Advantage New Haven, if you're in New Haven and you're double E, electrical engineering, you spend a lot of time at Sally's Pizza. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. You're grinding, you're cramming, differential equations, and the rest of it. I assume you took the Wheatstone Bridge to Sally's. What was it like, double E at Yale, in a school acclaimed for liberal arts? How lonely were you?
We spent a lot of time in a basement away from sunlight.
Yeah. Abe Tarapani with us, I heard this morning on what he's doing in this innovation. Explain to me your innovation project right now at AI.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. So I'm the CEO of Atlas AI. We're a Palo Alto, California-based startup that is building models based on geospatial data. So geospatial is data that has a location or a geographic element associated with it. So our models aim to understand and anticipate what the future of the planet is likely to look like, where people are likely to live in the future, how economy is likely to evolve and adapt in relation to macro factors like conflict or climate change. And we aim to help international organizations.
I would go to climate flooding today, but this morning I have to go to conflict as we consider 3 wars, Ukraine, Gaza, and north to Lebanon as well. What is your value add to people assessing the conflict in the Levant?
So there are some immediate elements of monitoring the impact of the conflict on the environment itself, but also on communities. How are people being displaced, forced to move from the places that they live because of the nature of the conflict? But more so than that, some of the interesting factors are, how is the conflict impacting the agricultural industry in Ukraine, and what global implications does that have on supply chains that flow from this critical area of agriculture?
Talk about your role in the broader AI sector, if we can christen that or call it that now. I mean, we talk a lot about a handful of companies in particular, talk a lot about chip manufacturing as well. As you look at the sort of nascency, evolution, early evolution of it, where are we in that process now?
So not surprising, a lot of the early focus has been on modalities of information that we work with almost every day. Text, video, imagery.
Tom's phone.
Tom's phone. Yeah. Where to find pizza in New Haven.
Yes.
Some of the interesting next set of questions that we're dealing with relate to different types of data. How do we help organizations understand the information that they have access to that may not be as neatly structured in a document or in an image file? Like satellite imagery is a good example. There is an immense amount of information about economic activity, about the climate, about other dimensions of change that's happening on the planet. And we have satellite images that are capturing every square foot of the planet every single day now. Using AI gives us a real-time lens on what change is unfolding across the planet in a way that some of the other aspects of AI are not able to capture today.
I think that so many of us glom on to kind of the aw shucks factor of the modality that you're talking about, how it can affect our lives individually. Do you think that people, as of yet, comprehend kind of the wider implications of what AI will be able to offer, indeed what it may offer right now?
They're starting to, in part because it's on our phone, and we have access to magical technology that allows us to do things that we couldn't do yesterday. The reality is that a lot of this is just scratching the surface of what we're seeing come out of the labs in Stanford and Yale and other schools in terms of not just how individual models, but how models that can reason, that can engage with the world are able to now start to enhance the productivity of companies and organizations.
You are hugely qualified to answer a question that's underscored by
related.
Microsoft, not pizza related, but Microsoft and Constellation and 3 Mile Island, fine. The thermodynamics of all this AI chit-chat and the need for electricity, to me there's almost a free lunch to it. What will be the cost of having to generate all that electricity to power your world?
Well, I think there's probably 2 questions embedded there. What's the cost and what's the sustainability of being able to do so? And the good news is that from a sustainability angle, we are now seeing the acceleration of new technologies like solar and wind, but also hydrogen and other newer energy sources that are going to be prevalent in the next couple of decades. So the energy demand will be significant, but I'm also very optimistic that this energy will be powered by renewable, sustainable sources of energy.
What do the 7 big stocks, what do they get from you? When you talk to NVIDIA, when you talk to Microsoft, how do they listen to what Atlas AI is doing?
So I'll give you a specific example in that we partner with Google Cloud extensively. Our technology is built on Google Cloud, and we're a member of a sustainability ecosystem within Google Cloud that's focused on questions of how do we help companies advance their sustainability priorities. So Google has Gemini. They have one of the leading large language models, but many of their customers are asking a whole array of questions related to how does Airbus think about anticipating the demand of air travel in Indonesia in the future. And so there are questions that language models are not by themselves able to answer that Atlas AI can.
Atlas AI question, how about that Midtown traffic visit today? Google Cloud going to tell me about getting over to lunch?
I wish I could have told you how to get to the east side last night.
Abe, well, let me just stick with infrastructure a little bit here, and we hear from Jensen Huang about how he deploys the chips that his company is making, and there's such demand for them. When push comes to shove, is that a difficulty for folks like you who are starting these businesses in this space, just getting access to the infrastructure, getting the chips, to put it bluntly, getting the access to these data centers? How much of that is yet a hurdle to the kind of development that you'd like to see?
It's a question that we constantly have to face, because not only are we thinking about the current generation of model, but we're also now thinking about next year's generation. The pace of training new models is accelerating at such a pace that you need to be thinking 1 or 2 generations down the line. And with each generation, the compute requirements are increasing exponentially. I'll say that the last few years are likely tougher than the next few years will be. The supply chains are starting to work themselves out. NVIDIA and other companies have been able to now adapt. New generations are coming out that are more efficient. So that's not one of the elements that we worry most about when we think about the next few years' growth of the business.
It's been wonderful. Come to our world headquarters sometime. I'd love to talk to you from our studios. Abe Tarapani with us with Atlas AI, road trip to Sally's in New Haven for further research.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Let's get right to it with the markets open. Our news from our world headquarters, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, and Lisa. Israel's military says it's launched a new wave of attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon, hitting more than 1,300 targets in the last 24 hours. Bloomberg Middle East correspondent Jumana Bersachi is monitoring from our European headquarters in London.
In the past week, we have seen a serious change of calculus in how this border is being treated. Up until a week ago, you could say that both Israel and Hezbollah were sort of conducting themselves within rules of engagement around a 10-20 kilometer radius away from the border. But things have dramatically stepped up in the last week, from those telecommunication device explosions culminating in the airstrikes across Lebanon, not just in southern Lebanon yesterday, but within Beirut and also the eastern Bekaa, which is close to the Syrian border.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersachi reporting from London. President Biden will address the 79th UN General Assembly in New York. He will use his final address to the global body to once again champion the value of alliance building. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard has a preview from Washington.
his attempts to get collective diplomacy working globally have been tested, though, by the Middle East. We have seen since the Hamas invasion of Israel in almost a year ago that this sort of collective diplomacy is being really tested by such an intractable conflict, and one that's at risk of escalating, as we saw even yesterday.
Bloomberg's Mike Shepard in Washington. And you can hear President Biden's address to the UN General Assembly on Bloomberg Radio in about a half an hour. Hurricane watches have been issued along Florida's western coastline as forecasters monitor a Caribbean storm that is expected to gather steam in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The system, likely to be named Helene, could tear across Florida's Big Bend region this week before plunging into southern Georgia. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. From the mountains of Asheville over to the east to 3 houses falling into the Atlantic Ocean, which is happening right now in North Carolina. It's an important state. Is it the South or is it not?
It is something that I wrestled with and heard people wrestling with a lot of time while I grew up in North Carolina. It's the New South, they're fond of saying, where I come from. And it's certainly going to be key here in this election going forward. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, the kind of crisis that has enveloped the Republican Party in North Carolina. The lieutenant governor running for the seat as governor this year, dealing with all of this scandal, his campaign imploding, and this kind of uneasy relationship between the Trump campaign and his. Donald Trump very fulsomely embraced him earlier in this campaign. He didn't do that when he was in town this weekend, but posing a huge problem. We talk about the path forward in the context of Arizona, North Carolina, Tom, arguably as important to Democrats and Republicans alike.
Gura, knowledgeable, Keene, not. So I call it the Carolinas because I never know if it's North or South. How is Governor Haley doing? Is she participating in the Trump-a-thon?
She has been acting as a surrogate for him. With more energy than we might have expected, given the criticisms that she had of him before. But she's taken a job hosting a show on Sirius XM satellite radio up until the election for a few weeks afterwards. So
drive time in the morning?
Drive time in the morning.
I didn't know this.
Step on us just a little bit, but broadening her aperture a little bit, but still very much supporting the former president as he campaigns again.
How do you win North Carolina? Do you win it in the Triangle? Do you win it in the rural towns? I mean, what's the pixie dust of taking those electoral votes?
I think that the Triangle is safely Democratic. It's home, of course, to 3 major universities, UNC, NC State, and Duke, solidly blue. Charlotte is another animal, of course, a city that has grown so much in recent years, has so many people working in finance, and is more than just the city itself. The area surrounding it is huge and has a ton of people. So you see former President Trump traveling there this week. He'll hold a rally there. It's contested territory, I would say, but it's really the eastern part of the state that's most interesting to me. Rural, full of farming, former tobacco land, a place that can go either way, as we've seen in cycles past.
I mean, that's the heart of the matter, isn't it? I got to get the data up here. I'm doing this on
Bloomberg Anywhere app.
Yes. Bloomberg app. I mean, I've got it set up here, and the answer is we're open for trading, and it's very green on the screen. I'm looking at levels, 42,200 on the Dow. SPX not near 5,800 yet. We're not quite there. 5,700, just under 20,000. On the NASDAQ 100, there's just a silence among those cautious in this continued bull market. I should have bought a share. I mean, triple leveraged all cash.
Triple leveraged all cash, the Keene signature fund. Should have talked to some of these portfolio managers. Maybe they wanted.
I have cornered them. they go, you need a climate-centric triple leveraged all cash. I go.
Your ESG rating is strong, Tom. I know from your Uber usage.
It's pretty weak.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, advancing. This is after China's central bank unveiled a broad package of monetary stimulus measures to revive its economy. Right now, we are on records watch. So we have the Nasdaq up 0.2%, 48 points, 18,022. The Dow up 68 points, 42,192. And the S&P 500 up 4 points at 5,723. We have the two-year yield 3.59%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%. And that's up 3 basis points. Key benchmarks in China. Hong Kong jumped by about 4%. Then you have U.S. listed Chinese stocks advancing. We have shares of Alibaba up more than 6%. JD.com up more than 9%. Shares of Visa, they're down 3%. Sources say the DOJ plans to sue it for allegedly monopolizing the U.S. debit card market. And a stock on the move, Liberty Broadband, it's up about 25%. The cable company proposed an all-stock merger with Charter Communications. Charter right now down about 1%. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Finally, for Global Wall Street, an important conversation. You think of the Securities and Exchange Commission in America, FSA in London. How about the International Organization of Securities Commissions, IOSCO? Is that how?
IOSCO, that's
IOSCO,
right.
thank you. Joining us from IOSCO in Brussels with all the headaches of regulation and cryptocurrency's future, Jean-Paul Servais joins us this morning. Wonderful to have you with us. Different presidential candidates are saying crypto is part of a legitimate American political and economic future. Where does that take our understanding of crypto if we see politicians talking it up?
Yeah, well, it's part of the political legitimacy debate. It's about innovation. We as securities market regulator are not against innovation, but our job is to ensure that there is trust, that there are no accidents. And due to the fact that we know that most of the time, in fact, we have a business developed by cross-border, I would say, crypto asset provider. We need to be here. And IOSCO means, in fact, the global membership organization. We have 130 jurisdictions. It means that my colleague and members are involved in the supervision of 95% of the financial, like the US SEC and the US CFTC. So we need to be there, and that's what we did. We endorsed last year a toolkit in order to help all jurisdictions to have an appropriate supervision. It's not about, I would say, enforcement as such. That's the job of the national agency, like in the US. So we try to avoid that there are collapses, that there are accidents, that there are problems about the quality, I would say, of the business.
There's a new legitimacy. Lawrence Fink of BlackRock is talking it up. Everybody else. Eric Balchunas at Bloomberg is encyclopedic on this. That's all great. But how is the Bitcoin underlying that the Bank of International Settlements has studied so hard? Is there an underlying value like there is to gold, or what's the latest stock I have that's cratered? There's something there.
That's a very difficult question, and you are for there, of course, because it's a never-ending story. Our, I would say, objective is to be helpful for discovery price, to avoid, let us be clear, many of the accidents which took place during the crypto meet, it was about the absence of segregation of assets. Something that is quite manageable, I would say, and something that had to be managed for 30 years by trading venues, stock exchange, asset management. What we are proposing is to copy and paste this well-known principle and then to provide that for the sake of the supervision. We're working very hard with the IMF, and I was very happy to see that now the IMF start by using our toolkit when they perform their well-known mission, Article 4, FSAP, and so. It means that we are useful and that we are working together with other global standards.
You'll forgive the phrase, but I imagine a lot of your job is herding cats. You're having to deal with all of these regulatory agencies all over the world, some of which have different priorities. How much unanimity is there? You can take crypto as an example, and how we've seen this, maybe arbitrage isn't a good way of putting it, but companies moving from place to place, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because they offer different things. Are we seeing a movement toward a more unified regulatory landscape?
Well, thanks for your question. That's maybe my colleague thought that a Belgian guy had to be elected, because the DNA of Belgium is about Belgium compromise, because we are not sure that our country still exists the day after. So we need compromise every day. We never vote. It's like United Nations. except that I think that we are able to
get things done. Okay.
So it's consensus,
yes,
because it's a global membership organization. And I think that we are able to find consensus because whenever you have global challenges, risk and opportunity, we are here. Because our members are involved in the supervision of 95%, our majority of members are in fact growing emerging market. So when we speak about crypto assets, that's a danger also for crypto and an opportunity also for many countries in Africa funds. The same for climate funds. It's cross-border by definition.
I understand there can be banking transactions, cross-border transactions, but I still don't see out there a lot of use of crypto in day-to-day transactions. Do you envision out there crypto will actually be a day-to-day transaction?
I think that you are right to be prudent. There are many expectations, I think. The first step, if you want to have confidence in crypto, is to have a solid framework at global frame. And that's what we are doing for the time being. And we are going the right direction because I think that our toolkit was able to take into account what happens last year, the crypto winter, some accident, and that's the objective of IOSCO, to be helpful for the members. Like for climate finance, that's the reason why I have the pleasure to be here in New York.
Let's pull back a bit as you look at the broader landscape. Are there pockets of risk or things that give you pause for concern at this point in time when it comes to sort of the regulatory risk, regulatory landscape?
Yeah. As IOSCO chair, I think that there are two global issues, climate finance and the former shadow banking. Climate finance, if you are not able to speak more or less the same language, to use the same, I would say, sustainability reporting standard, to gather data as much as possible, and that's the reason why the initiative taken by Michael Bloomberg and Emmanuel Macron is going in the right direction, to extract data, we will have many questions about greenwashing. Because greenwashing means most of the time the lack of capacity to use the same language. And that's the reason why we endorsed last year ISSB standard. It means at the end of the day, 130,000 companies will use the same standard. It's a giant step, let us be clear. Who could believe that some years ago? And it's a recent one, and it's thanks to the involvement of IOSCO. The same for shadow banking. I would say we know the evolution after the subprime crisis. And we are now working, I would say, very intensely with the BIS, with the FSB. We are reporting to the G20 leaders in order to develop new tools. For instance, we were able, together with the SSB, to publish a useful toolkit for the liquidity of management tool management. We are now working on leverage in order to take into account that once if Archegos, the gains and so on. So there is always something to learn, I would say, and then to make progress about new toolkits.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul Servais with
Thank you.
With IOSCO today. Greatly appreciate that on crypto and on the regulation to come. I still don't understand the underlying. I'm going to let you explain that.
Well,
in your free time.
Yeah, okay. I'll work on that for later this week. But you mentioned this earlier, looking ahead to the PCE data, and I want to ask you as we look ahead to the week's end, how critical, how important is that now that we have this cut, now that we've begun this rate cutting cycle? How much do those data matter?
The data matter, but not the way they're reported. Who does this correctly is Jason Furman at Harvard. You take given inflation data and you take it across 3-month annualized, 6-month annualized, 12-month, and you get a series of vectors. And the good news is it still indicates disinflation. Okay. And that's there, but you have almost too much disinflation in China right now. So that'll be key. This is on Friday. Well, of course, Senator, this summer. Are we back at the World Headquarters?
We're back at the World Headquarters. I'm here all week. Paul said he would leave me the keys to the Vespa. He did not, in fact, do that, but I'll be here. I'll be in with you.
We thank the Plaza Hotel for perfect coffee early in the morning. This has been great. Great for our team here in radio, Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television for the broadcast today. We're out on YouTube. Where you can subscribe to us on Bloomberg Podcast. That's building each and every day.
Can I note? Yeah, note here. We've got Alex Steele, Damian Sassower hosting Bloomberg Intelligence here, 10 to 12. The set will not go dark here.
With China,
at the Plaza, yes.
With China front and center, to have Damian Sassower with Alex is fabulous. This afternoon, Stephen Carroll of London with Carol Massar. Look for that on Bloomberg Business Week. So lots to go through. And you still don't know your big take.
No, I'll let you know, though. I'll let the world know.
Okay. So, Gura had a tantrum. He said, we got to play Leonard Cohen. And I said, I really just don't think Leonard Cohen fits the show. Yeah. So we did better. Joe Cocker singing Leonard Cohen. Good morning.
They're trying to change the system from within. I'm coming on.